welcome to meet you, Rob, for the meantime. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's March 4th, 2023, and today we are coming off of an event from last weekend, which was called the Black Proletariat and the Fourth American Revolution, the Making of a New American People, which was our symposium on W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in celebration of his 155th birthday. And so today we have a lot of topics to talk about since we haven't had this sort of free school in 2 weeks. And to begin, I wanted to first see if, Doc, you had anything you want to say, because otherwise we can toss it to the organizing committee for our upcoming Korea event, which is occurring in 3 weeks.
I don't have anything to say.
Okay, so I'll hand it off to Jeremiah, Nuri, and Anna. We just had our Black Reconstruction event, but here we are heading into another event, which is very exciting and I think continues some of the topics of discussion that have already been opened up.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Emily. I can start. So yeah, the Korea event is on March 17th and 18th. And it's going to be in person at the Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia. Address is 1219 Vine Street. And yeah, this is obviously coming very close off the heels of the Black Reconstruction event. And part of that was, some just original planning, like we just needed to get this venue set. But that being said, I think we are basically going full steam ahead with the planning for this event. And we know that people, especially in free school, are probably still recovering from and maybe a bit tired from all of the things that have been happening recently. But yeah, I think we're really excited to use the Korea event, not just to talk about Korea, but to also build on a lot of the ideas that we've already been talking about and working with in the free school, especially since the 10th anniversary. And so I think for those of us who've been organizing and also talking with different people who are participating in various ways, like this event, yes, is about the Korean Peninsula and the current tensions, and also trying to understand the history of Korea and the impact of imperialism there. But also this is, I think, really a chance for the free school, first of all, to bring together many different kinds of communities. We really want not just the Korean American community, but many different kinds of people from Philadelphia to attend. And this is really going to be a space and like a venue for the question of war and peace to be put squarely on the table, because this is really the question of our times. And we think that this is a question that can unite the American people and bring about a qualitative change also in their capacity to struggle for the future. And so that being said, just I wanted to say briefly about like sort of the underlying purpose, like that's kind of our understanding of the underlying purpose for this event. And yeah, so we have a set of like speakers and a program that we're working out. And if people haven't had a chance to read our appeal for the event, you can just go to koreapeace.org. And then the appeal should be there. And whether you're part of free school or you're tuning in, that should give you a sense of kind of what we're envisioning for sort of the vision and like why we want to do this event in the first place. But yeah, we're really hoping that, I don't know, I think part of the reason why we wanted to talk a bit about the event during this free school is not just because it's close, but that we really think that the ideas for this event, Anna and Nuri and I and Doc have been talking for a few months about Korea, but we have so much faith in the free school that we think that basically, I don't know, the way that I see it, it's like you kind of set these ideas loose amongst like free school people. And it's like, I just feel like people are so creative and they have so much capacity in the free school that, everyone comes with their own kind of ideas and like their own way of thinking about all of these problems that you can see are addressed in the appeal that we wrote. And so, yeah, we have a program with some speakers, which you can also see on the website. But really, we want to emphasize that we really want the free school we want this to be an all free school effort and people to show up, even if you're not in a formal speaking role, for this event, the audience participation is going to be really vital. And that's going to come especially from free school people, we hope. And so, so yeah, that's just kind of my understanding of like the vision for the event and the underlying purpose, really to bring this question of war and peace to the people as something for them to decide and not the ruling class. Whether it's in relation to Korea or any other place that the US government and the Biden administration is escalating tensions and pushing us closer to nuclear war. But yeah, maybe Anna and Nuri can also add on like the purpose part.
Yeah. Well, I think in the free school, we've been talking for a long time about the central question of war and peace, how important it is, like to the world, but especially for the American people to basically find their way. And yeah, like coming off of the heels of the Rage Against the War Machine rally and seeing like what could be basically a new, like a qualitatively different anti-war movement. And then also with the discussion of Black Reconstruction and Du Bois, like finding a Du Boisian way, method for like the American revolutionary process. And we were talking about democracy and how peace like is a very, like it's an essential democratic demand. And so I feel like everything that we're doing with the Korea event is meant for like Korean Americans, but especially the American people. And the US and South Korea are actually having joint military exercises from 13th to 23rd. And so these are like the annual drills, and they happen on a really massive scale. It'll be 10 days of basically the US flexing its military prowess and threatening North Korea. And under the previous administration, these drills were paused. And actually, like these joint drills are a major cause of like rising tensions, because part of the whole point is that North Korea, it's hard for North Korea to tell whether it's a drill or whether it's the real thing, because you're literally like simulating having an invasion. And so I think the timing, and along with all of the stuff with like Biden and nuclear war, it just is really important for us to have this discussion like of war and peace, but also to ground it in like the real, I guess, geopolitics and like concretely where like this crisis is playing out. And so, yeah, I think that's how I see the purpose of the event. And so it's not really like, we're trying to emphasize this too, but it's not about having every single detail of like factual knowledge. It's actually more that whatever we know like compels us to have a responsibility in the role that we have to play. And that goes for everybody who is interested in the event, who is coming to the event, or even like will hear anything related to what we're talking about in free school. Yeah.
Yeah, I just going off of what Jeremiah and Nuri have said. I guess like when I have been envisioning this event, I think also a lot. So I think especially going off of this idea of like not having to know all of the facts. I mean, there was something that we had off the case in like
Anna, speak
Oh,
up.
Anna, it's hard to hear you. I think your thumb is on your, or I think something happened with your sound.
Can you hear me? It's cool. Okay. I think in the earlier stages of planning, we also came up like with a lot of the same questions, like have we read everything that we needed to read? How do we know that we have all of the facts? But I think ultimately, and this goes for people who are presenting, discussing, or who will even just be participating as an attendee, but it's okay to not have all of the facts. It's more about, I think like this is what some people in the free school have described as like spiritual preparation. And I think like coming off of the heels of the Du Bois event, especially, but also the Rage Against the War Machine rally, I think the mood is very high. I think we're in the spirit, I think, of working out very specific things, both in terms of like this Du Boisian logic, this method. Actually, like how can we, for example, create a revolutionary science? How can we create a revolutionary method, knowledge categories, but then also applying that very, very concretely to the issues of war and peace. I think for this event, we really want to grapple concretely. And I think this is going to be big, especially for a free school event. to talk like very seriously about war. Because I think it is an abstraction for many Americans still. So yeah, I think there's something else I wanted to add, but it'll come back to me.
Yeah, maybe we can, if you think about it, you should say, but maybe we can also talk about the program and go over that. Just to quickly, one point from what Anna was saying, I think aside from like anyone's knowledge about Korea, actually the more important knowledge I think that the free school possesses is our assessment of the American people and where they're at and their capacity to struggle over these questions and to find their own path on these questions of war and peace. But do you want to go over the Friday program?
I think we'll probably just discuss like the parts of the program that like we're each most familiar with. But basically on Friday afternoon, Friday, March 17th, so that's just under 2 weeks from now, we'll start with like the art exhibit that Kathy, Purba, Manesfi, and Doe are helping to work on. And it's actually really exciting seeing how it's come together. I think it's been very ambitious to try to basically cover like 4,000 years of Korean history, but to try to present it in a way that can actually give people something. But that's really exciting. And then we'll read the peace appeal and we'll show a documentary film screening of North Korea Beyond the DMZ, which is like a 1-hour documentary film just showing the travels of this young Korean American woman in New York City, going to North Korea, like seeing the society and looking for her separated family members, because in her parents' generation, like they were separated during the Korean War. And so we're going to do all of that to sort of show the best aspects of like North Korean and generally like Korean civilization, but also bring it to the current moment of division, separation, and like basically just sort of concretely show all of these ideas, because then Saturday is going to be like the main, I guess, ideological meet where we're hoping to have a lot of like very spirited, lively discussion to try to work out and come to like some sort of shared conclusion. And the first panel is called Civilization and Modernity, a Task for the People. And we're coming to this because the concept of civilization has largely been taken over by basically reactionary forces. Like the ruling elite tries to make it so that Western civilization is the only advanced society, like advanced civilization, everything else is backwards. But right now is a time when even people in the West are calling for like the collapse of the Western civilization. And you also have the resurging importance of like China, Russia, India, all of which are like old civilizations. And so we think it's just important for the people to actually think about civilization again as something that they make, that they decide, and that ultimately all of civilization comes from the people. And so, yeah, we want to discuss the rise of Asia in like the Du Boisian framework, because Du Bois has talked a lot about it. Discussing like the role of imperialism in especially like the last century, 2 centuries of history as a disruption and as like over determining what civilizations can be, constraining them. And then talking about like Korea and America specifically as 2 examples and sort of 2, I guess like, yeah, just 2 representative examples, and then exploring like how civilization like fits, doesn't fit, like how it may like come to be. And so Serafina will be moderating that panel, and then Anna, Emily, and I will be presenting. And yeah, we're exploring this new format where we want to basically have the 3 panelists go and then the moderator respond and then ask some questions both to the audience and to the panelists. And so in doing this, we want to sort of immediately try to open it up to discussion, where the panelists are presenting and like providing some sort of knowledge, some framework, some ideas to start with. But really we want this to be like featuring, like focusing on the discussion. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'll talk some about the second panel. Oh yeah, and then obviously I guess like in between we're gonna have lunch, and then we're gonna have Korean food, and we're also having dancing and drumming from the Korean School of Southern New Jersey. So hopefully, especially the drums, that'll kind of wake people up after lunch.
People get sleepy after lunch. We're learning from all of these free school events in
There's a pattern.
so many ways.
That's good.
So then right after the performances, we're going to move on to our second panel. And this one is called Korea and the Forward March of Humanity. So this one, we are seeking to uncover and share critical knowledge which has been kept from both the American and the South Korean people. And I guess I think a big theme of this one is that like knowledge, insofar as it is really true, is not just for the sake of collecting knowledge, but rather it has a moral dimension which compels responsibility. And ours in this purpose, in the spirit of Du Bois and King and all of that, is to revive the moral spirit necessary to achieve Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community. So in that, we'll be discussing the wide-ranging foreign relations of North Korea and also the potential role of smaller states in an emerging world order that some, I think, actually many sources will probably call multipolarity, but we are calling it international democracy, and I think some others are too. So yeah, and then we'll also be examining the South Korean struggle for democracy, peace, and reunification in the context of the world peace and anti-colonial movements. I think taking a much more close look at the democratization movement, especially in the 70s and 80s, because I think for those of us who know about it, it's kind of been presented in a certain way, but we're actually, it actually does have a lot to do with really the struggle for sovereignty, peace, and a lot of that, and also exploring the devastating impact of anti-communism in the struggle for self-determination and unity. And lastly, we'll be exploring the capacity and achievements of the North Korean people through their state and social relations, with the purpose of understanding the necessary roles and the possible contributions of both the Korean and the American people towards peace and also progress in King's single garment of destiny. So yeah, the second panel is going to be pretty heavy, but I think it'll also be good. So I'll be moderating it, and the presenters are going to be Jahan, Alice, and Jeremiah.
Okay, I can talk about the last part of the event. But so after that panel, which is kind of going to be probably the most, we're thinking that it might be the most intense, that second panel, just because you're getting into some very controversial topics, specifically for Korean Americans, but also for Americans in general, like North Korea, one of the most vilified states in the world, at least in the Western world. And so we're also imagining that if we can address all the questions that come up from the first two panels, we know that people probably have thoughts that they've been kind of digesting for the duration of the day. And so that is going to build up to what we're calling a community discussion as the kind of finale of the event, or the last part of the event, in which we are going to hopefully bring in as much audience participation as possible. I'm going to allow people to really just speak their minds and say what they think in relation to the overall event, but also in relation to the specific focus of this discussion. So the community discussion is called "The Democratic Demand for Peace Amid the Crisis of War." And we're still confirming the speakers. We've confirmed Brandon Doe and Xiao Yin, who is part of the Bandung reading group. And we also have reached out to Garland Nixon to speak, and we're just confirming the details with him, as well as this woman, Hyejung Park, who directed the film that we're going to show on Friday evening, and she's based in Philadelphia. But yeah, basically the framing of the discussion is going to be, again, putting the question of war and peace on the table for the people to decide. Because whether it's like the Ukraine-Russia war or the rising tensions in the Korean Peninsula that Nuri mentioned earlier, Even if like war is a bit of an abstract thing for Americans, I still think that for most Americans, war and peace has been something that's been on the minds of the broad sections of the American people. And we think that it's a question that cuts to the basic essence of American democracy and the betrayal of democracy in this country. Because how can you really claim to be a democratic society when essentially like the broad mass of your people have no actual say in deciding whether their government decides to fund or start wars that could essentially threaten the existence of all of humanity? Like, is that really a democratic society? And so, like, yeah, through the discussion, we're going to try to put this question on the table for ordinary people to independently discuss and decide on their own terms. And that hopefully this can sort of help advance the democratic capacities of people to chart a new path forward for this country. And so we're going to sort of frame a few questions similar to the Du Bois event town hall to the participants, and that these questions can also be raised to the audience. But briefly, the questions are, what is the war agenda and how do you see it impacting ordinary Americans and society as a whole? Second question, how do you assess the Biden administration's current posture towards Korea as well as countries like Russia and China? Are we closer to nuclear war? And what are the consequences for the people if so? Third question, how does this war agenda manifest in relation to domestic crises of legitimacy and social disorder within American society? What are the most detrimental trends in the current ideological landscape that impact people's capacity to unite and struggle for the future? And then the fourth question, which is the free school question, do the American people have the capacity to achieve peace and join humanity? How might this capacity be cultivated and ultimately realized? And so we're going to ask these questions to the participants. And then also like sort of halfway through the discussion, we're going to open it up for the audience to just have a kind of open general discussion around these topics. And so that's going to ultimately lead to the conclusion of the event after that community discussion. But I'm going to do should we do the exhibit? Or?
Yeah, we can. Okay.
We also, Parb and I were just talking about the questions for the community discussion. Those questions are so like what's the right word? Not heavy, but like to the point. Like they're such good questions. And then Parb and I were talking about how like maybe like an interesting additional question is one about what a peace movement looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We should make that much more explicit in the last question.
Yeah, because also like, that would also tie into the second panel, but also it would go into the question of Trump in 2024 as well.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, because I think basically for the event, like we're emphasizing discussion because we believe that people have the democratic capacity to like actually determine and turn the tide of this country. But we also want to emphasize the knowledge aspect of it, which is that we want to arm the people with like the necessary knowledge that they actually need to make a principled stand. And I think that's basically what's been driving like the programming, the decisions for the particular panels, and the choice of the movie. Because the film, like in all of this, like we're not trying to pull out the most obscure pieces of knowledge that nobody's going to know or have the most like contrary takes possible. It's really like what is needed for the people, like it or leave it, like this is still needed. And I guess if people have thoughts, we can maybe talk a little, and then we were thinking of maybe just sharing some of the images from the exhibit really quickly, just to give like impressions. But yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Just one thing. This year is the 75th anniversary, I think in early February, the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That is the North Korean state. So I think we, at some point, should make note of that. Just one other thing. On the question of a peace movement of a new type, we could also talk about it as Martin Luther King's concept. This is just the concept, Martin Luther King's concept of what a peace movement must be. And that's from, I think we can, tease that out of the speech for time to break silence. Those are
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, also, oh, sorry, there's an echo. In addition to the DPRK anniversary, I don't know if we mentioned, but this year is the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement, which basically implemented a ceasefire, but didn't actually end the Korean War, which I don't know if many Americans know that the Korean War has never officially ended. And so it's basically been 70 years of like a stalemate, but not a formal end to the war.
Yeah.
I really like the concept of international democracy you guys brought up. I really like the concept of international democracy. I think on top of multipolarity, because oh no, okay, but yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say.
Yeah, on that point, I was also thinking about that because I recall that in that Africa documentary that Nuri had put together and others had put together, there was a quote from Du Bois talking about, I think he used this phrase, international democracy or world democracy. I think it was from World in Africa. I've been meaning to go back and look at that because I think there is some need to tease out this concept of, we've talked about before about how we've been using multipolarity, but it's not an exact fit to describe everything that's required and the significance of what is emerging, because some people keep comparing it to, multipolarity, you mean the World War I era where there were different world power. We're talking about something different in terms of democracy, fulfilling these democratic aspirations of the anti-colonial struggle and the different civilizations of the world.
Yeah, because even some of the like the people who commented on the whole multipolarity thing, some of them even use the language of great power, kind of great power rivalry, which I think is, as Jahan was saying, not just incorrect, but leads to mistaken assumptions that essentially would be geared towards like another world war. But I think the interesting thing about examining North Korea and Korea in general in relation to this whole question of international world democracy is it basically forces you to recognize or deal with the fact that like how it's not really just about these bigger countries like China and Russia, but also it's about the smaller nations too, which have a vital role to play, but it just might look different. But that like hopefully the emergence and the achievement of a new world order along these terms would actually provide like a democratic means and space for those smaller countries as well to play their role in essentially pushing forward the progress of humanity.
Yeah, and I guess like one small thing that I would add to that is like I think as we've also been working out this question of civilization, I think just a lot of the literature that like we've come up or that we've come across, they like to speak about whether it's the original Cold War or like this new Cold War in terms of like a clash of civilizations. Like we want to take the stance that like that's wrong. That's not what's going on here, because actually it is not a clash of civilizations of like Western versus Eastern or something like that, but rather like the real line to draw is between empire and humanity, and that civilizations like are actually made by and a part of humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the great power rivalry thing basically thinks that all large civilizations are fundamentally imperialist, or that now they're also all capitalist. And I feel like that's another reason why I think we have to clearly define both civilization and imperialism, because just being large does not mean that you're like imperialist. And we want to, I guess, historicize imperialism as like the modern idea, which has literally been like England, like America, and say like it's very, yeah, it's just a weird reading of history to be like, oh, like the Ottoman Empire was like the same as empire, and like everything is the same in history. Because we want to, yeah, like basically even with the art exhibit, we want to show that although there are similarities in certain periods, like superficial, like maybe visual similarities, that actually history moves forward and things develop and actually like fundamentally change. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just joked to Purba that in some ways that idea that human history from the beginning has been the same of like Clash of Civilizations is like kind of the world equivalent of Gerald Horne's 1776 counter-revolution thesis. And yeah, it's also cool having this conversation because like the topic that I've been assigned is about America and how to think about civilization with America, like the question of America, where it's going, what does it mean? Is America civilization? Is it working towards something else? What does all this mean? And like in the morning when I had arrived at Purba's place, like that's kind of the main topic of conversation I carry everywhere with me where I go to like get everyone's thoughts. But oh shoot, I'm gonna lose my train of thought. But we were basically talking about this thing of, well, yeah, what you were saying, Nuri, about how actually imperialism is it's a modern system of modern invention, and that how important it is, even in America's history, to understand, like this is Du Bois's point, that America has there's a certain logic and historical development in America, one that is actually revolutionary, just like world humanity's march forward towards freedom, towards democracy. In America, there was that history too, but it was disrupted with the downfall of Reconstruction, the birth of imperialism, colonialism, a new system of finance capital that is like intertwined with like the deep state, militarism, politics, all of that. And that it's exactly actually after World War II, and this was Purba's point, like after World War II, and then you have the Korean War, the war in Vietnam, like that's where you not only have America's forceful disruption, like division of the world, like disrupting humanity's march forward, but it's at that historical moment where there's a deep disruption of America's own development, the development of the American people. So yeah, I don't know, this is all really exciting. Like I think it's all also interconnected, and I echo what Caleb was saying about this concept of international democracy. Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, it really is that the call for peace, the stand for peace, is the democratic demand of the American people. I mean, it's exactly war. Like you could say war or imperialism is the highest form of capitalism, but actually you could say war and imperialism, what has degraded Korea so much, Vietnam, the world, it's exactly a product of ideological white supremacy too. The cause of the downfall of Reconstruction, the division between white and black labor in America, when they very much belonged together and together could free America from a very inhumane civilization. But yeah, just this thing that like it's actually the war machine. It's the war machine, militarism, war after like the downfall of Reconstruction and like imperialism and colonialism after World War II, that it's at that point where America itself becomes very lost. And I think that was King's point.
Yeah.
Add one small thing, which is I think, Nuri, what you were bringing up about the clash of civilizations, or how people apply the same concept of empire to history from like 500, 1,000 years ago. And then also, Emily, what you said about the counter-revolution, or like Gerald Horne's counter-revolution thesis, it made me think about that book Sapiens, which I think is still which is still a pretty popular idea. I feel like which is almost,
Michelle, can you say the name of that book again? It was not clear.
Called Sapiens, from Homo sapiens, and I think it's that same thesis, but then applied to this question of human capacity, or how much humanity has advanced or not advanced, and how, because people, I think, who follow that ideological train, basically say that humanity has always been, like barbaric. Humanity has always been cruel. And they drag that out over, I think, like thousands of years. So yeah, I mean, all this to say that I think this is going to be an important event. And I know I'm very interested in this new formulation and this new idea that we've been building around, like, what is the American people's capacity to struggle, but not just the American people, but world humanity? Like, how will it advance?
Yeah, that reminds me of in the 10th anniversary when we had gone. I just remember thinking about how the Pan-African Congresses had developed, or from Du Bois, and then the question about the world peace movement had also developed from that crux of like the Pan-Africanist movement, like the communist. Like there's a definite strain of defining and understanding how imperialism actually was able to be formed, like from either the slave trade, the colonialization, and then how the struggle against racism, colonialism, and war is the actual like revolutionary thing, like the revolutionary kernel of the world peace of the world peace movement. And I think like the same thing with North Korea, like Vietnam, and like Emma was saying earlier, like we're hitting the crux of the question against colonialism, against war, which is home because in America it is racism, and then abroad because of the, like the colonized and the colonizer problem.
Yeah. Could I also say, I think, this discussion has actually been very clarifying and helpful, in part because, like, and like even with Emily's like question of like how to make sense of civilization in America, I actually feel like when you read back through people like Du Bois and Baldwin, like Paul Robeson, in some ways it's like, I think for them too, it was a question that maybe they hadn't fully like figured out yet, if that makes sense. And they were still trying to work it out, because part of the question is Western civilization essentially imperialist? And I think that people had different ways of talking about it at different points in time. And I think even in the free school, we've kind of used that language of like the West and kind of essentially implicitly saying like when we say the West, we mean imperialism. But actually, I think it's kind of an open question, in part because part of the reason why we framed the first panel the way we did was that it was actually inspired by Black Reconstruction, and how at the point when Du Bois talks about his theory of democracy, he turns to civilization, and he says that America had a chance to achieve a new, essentially modern civilization in which the broad masses of people could rule, and that this would be a new stage of human civilization itself, like essentially like a new modernity. And that this modernity was betrayed, which is why we use the term civilization and modernity. This is something that can be achieved by the people. But yeah, I think I'm just excited for that first panel, in part because it's kind of like addressing questions that have been part of the free schools, also ideological development, but are going back to even maybe discussions and kind of working ideas that people like Du Bois and Baldwin had back during the time of the Black Freedom Movement, but when they were also seeing America kind of go through this progression of essentially becoming like the leading imperialist power in the world after World War II.
Yeah, just to jump off that, because that was something that had come up in a conversation me and Nuri had, because in general, I've been also given the opportunity to moderate the civilization panel, and I've been talking about it, not with Anna yet, but we will. But that point made me think about the fact of, well, now it can be said of the Black proletariat being a civilization in potentiality. But we talked about that idea before. But I think it's interesting because it's about how, like, we've talked about, what is the knowledge that could be if human beings were able to think, that includes Hegel, or like, you know what I mean? Because because of anti-communism, the universities and the ruling elites took out a lot of ways of getting information and a lot of ways of knowing.
Thinking, yes.
And then two, like, what would the capacity be of the American people if Baldwin, Du Bois, and King were taught? It's not just to essentialize figures in man, but it's to know that there's a development, or there was a development during that period, where philosophy, culture, were actually opened up, broadened, and that they weren't like kind of constrained by this total shutdown that like maybe the 80s and 90s were also turning into, but what's interesting about that is that the American society has the potential to be at a different stage, not kept back and being like, oh, we are just the same as the barbarians before Greece, had taken over. Like that's been like thousands, like we've moved beyond Greece at this point.
We've moved beyond what?
Like Greece and the Roman Empire. But those are like, what are the actual fundamental philosophical and like essential things that this American society not only has produced, but contain already within our democratic either ideas, but in like the basic constitution and other things like that. Like, what is it that we really are? And I think it's the question of who do we rely on as a basis of our civilization that you guys are already bringing up anyway. Is it the ruling elites? Is it just this France and like this conglomerate of like Europe that used to be and actually isn't at all anymore? Or is it the future? China, Africa, Korea, like people who are coming close together, India, like who are able to be beyond, or at least grapple towards and strive towards a new world that is beyond Europe. Period. Like the end of, because we used to also talk about like the age of
Europe and the age of humanity.
Yeah, to the age of humanity. And that's the essential question also underlying the civilization panel, which is clarifying because it has a concrete, what word came to mind was appeal, but purpose. Because the same thing with democracy, or even the word that Jahan brought up last week was like, or like the week before, about weird having to do with destiny and all these things.
Well, what did
you remember Jahan? He talked about like the sorrow. No, he had brought up the sorrow songs or whatever, and Du Bois was like the weird old songs.
Oh yeah.
And he defined weird as being.
Did he say weird? But go ahead, whatever.
The point being is that the point is that like what is the essence, like what is the philosophical and like what's the right word? Because civilization doesn't have to deal with something like broad and kind of like abstract, but it just has like the livelihoods, like the life world.
The life world of the ordinary person.
And what does that contain? Because you also remember how you also talked about how Philly used to be a different city? Yeah. This city that we're living in is also struggling between like Comcast and like all these gentrification and things like that. The deindustrialization, it's a struggle. And that's the same thing pointed out, like what is the real democratic demands that people have, and what would that also mean in terms of the life world and of this country, I would say.
I like the emphasis upon democracy, democratic internationalism, a civilization grounded in democracy, in actual democracy, which would in effect be a new civilization, a transcendent civilization. And I just one small point, and it's first of all, this, just as we're discussing it, it is such a politically and intellectually exciting thing. To talk about Korea is to talk about humanity and its future. The other thing, just my last point, a lot of people frame anti-communism as the alternative to democracy, when in fact, anti-communism is the foundation of modern imperialism and modern war. And hence there cannot be a compromise politically and ideologically with anti-communism in any of its forms.
Right.
Because anti-communism, as we see, is the justification for war. And of course, in the case of North Korea, this unbelievable society, which preserves the ancient of Korean civilization while imagining the future of it. It is North Korea. And I know in our discussions, in the early part, we were trying to figure out, our audiences, the Korean population in Philadelphia, how would they understand this and how could we frame it? And I think it was Nuri who at one point came to the meeting and then just said straight up, we cannot go forward with this conference unless we acknowledge that, I think the way you put it, maybe I put it, I don't know, that North Korea preserves the best of Korean civilization and is the foundation of the struggle for peace on the Korean Peninsula. I mean, but it is smeared and under assault constantly because of the politics of anti-communism, which, by the way, we'll get to that later, I hope, in the free school today. I guess the best word I can think of right now, the abject destructiveness of anti-communism for American people, for Black Americans. It eviscerates, it trivializes, it subverts our great struggle and diminishes figures like, as you say, Du Bois, Robeson, all of these people who gave their lives fighting the ideology of anti-communism as central to the struggle for peace. And we cannot forget that, or we must help to educate a new generation for whom the struggle for democracy is an existential one. If the young generation is not successful in fighting for democracy and peace, there will not be another generation after it. And I agree with you all and the organizers. This is a great moment of truth. This is not a time to play. This is not, when we talk about the marches on Washington for peace, some people think we have the luxury of being able to nitpick and play, and I wasn't consulted, therefore I'm not going, all that type of thing. But I think the seriousness with the way you all are conceptualizing this is extraordinary, and I just can't wait for it.
Do you want me to share some slides from the exhibit? Okay, I'll do that really quick.
Basically, we're still working. Like, I think we've talked a lot in the last week, and we have some like visual themes and also just like mediums and I think ideas. But we're trying to show basically the development of Korean civilization. So we're not grouping by themes, we're grouping by like basically time periods and eras of history, and showing like the advancement of certain ideas, and like the return to certain themes. Yeah.
They're so cool.
That art is.
Yeah, really through.
Yeah, I'm like, if you want to show some of the images, I think some of the sections will be developed, but this is great.
But yeah,
There's an app from computer.
Yeah, so basically we're trying to show that before unification, you have these three kingdoms, and then, okay, now we're into the 20th century, but like the mountains and the landscape, that's like late Joseon, and then you can keep going.
Wait, can you go to the beginning again? I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, maybe we can just go over sort of like the broad arc from the beginning. So before there's the unification of the three kingdoms, you have basically like tribes and like mini kingdoms. But through unification, I feel like Korean history, like that's when it becomes like actually a unified civilization. And it's only through like the combining of the kingdoms and the resources that you're able to produce like really advanced, I think, pieces of art and culture that actually contribute something to humanity. And so you see like influences of Buddhism here, but then I think in the next one, you get to like the Seokram Grotto, which is like very, I think, technologically advanced, like in the mathematics and the geometry of it. It's like built into the side of like a mountain. So it's like a cave in a mountain. And then the next one, there's this Tripitaka Koreana, which is like Buddhist scriptures that are carved into wooden blocks. And so this is like 80,000 blocks. And so like millions and millions of like letters, and there aren't any mistakes in it. And I think to make this, they had to like age the wood so that it wouldn't get rotten. And so it took like 4 years to like prepare these wooden blocks, and then people had to carve it by hand. And they're like stored in this like building to prevent rotting and molding and stuff. But unfortunately, it was actually burned, I think, during the Mongol invasions. So it's a demonstration of like how like basically war destroys all the contributions of humanity. And then I think one of the kings made a new version of it in like dedication to peace, like hoping like, oh, like we hope that there won't be war anymore. And I think this is like one of the biggest collections of like Buddhist scripts in the world. And it's still like pretty pristine. And I think actually in the 1980s, they tried to move them into like an air-conditioned warehouse, and immediately the block started to deteriorate. So it's kind of an example of like ancient knowledge versus like modern. Yeah. We can move on. And then, yeah, this is like the Chosun dynasty, which lasted like hundreds and hundreds of years. It's the longest one. And so we have like landscapes, the continuity of Buddhism and like ink. And so you have the development of the Korean writing script, which was in like the 1400s, and it was invented by a king because Chinese script is like hard for peasants to learn. So this was a way for like peasants to actually be able to like understand the documents that they were signing. And it's like pretty scientifically developed where it's really easy to learn how to read. And in this time, I think like the first movable printing press was actually invented. So it's not Gutenberg, it's actually like the Koreans. Although you could argue that Gutenberg like perfected it. But you also have calligraphy and like ink brush strokes. And then you see like the landscapes and the mountains, like some determining features of like Korean geography and like sense of place. And then so that's just like the Chosun dynasty. And then we're trying to really show the brutality of imperialism that disrupts the development of civilization with Japanese colonization and the Korean War. So you have on the right, like examples of the Japanese occupation where Koreans had to like write and speak Japanese, had to like dress in the way that the Japanese like modern people dressed. And then on the left, I think you have the March 1st movement, which was one of like the first real movements, like mass movements to sort of try to fight against Japanese imperialism. And there was like a Declaration of Independence that was produced from this.
Not a single man is armed.
And so then I think on the left is like the land reform of 1947 after the Japanese occupation. So we have like this brief period of 5 years, 45 to 50, between like the end of Japanese occupation and the beginning of the Korean War. The next one, I think. So you have like the revival of language and like the beginning of something, but then the war breaks out. And you see like basically the devastation of the war in the next few slides. And then yeah, the next one I think too, like we're trying to show like how like incredibly like awful and just unnatural this is, and like trying to I think just show the scope of the destruction and how like wrong it was. Because this also I think helps explain like why North Korea like views history the way that it does. And then we also wanted to show like after, can keep going.
Those are really difficult.
Yeah.
Really difficult.
Yeah.
But we also want to show like international support as well, that Korea has always been, I think, important to the world, not in like a self-centered or chauvinistic way, but that at the time, like people like Du Bois and Robson recognized the international gravity of the situation. And at the time, I think many people actually thought, oh shit, like this could be World War III. And I feel like today too, like the Korean Peninsula is a place where World War III really could happen. Yeah, and then the next slide is also like photos of that. Yep. And then now we're going to go into like post-war, where we have both North and South Korea. And so showing like the rebuilding, but along like kind of very different lines, different ideas of modernity, but then a shared striving for democracy that comes out. So we have like magazines like right after, during the period of Reconstruction. And you can see, I guess, like the themes, the determination, like the art and cultural, like, yeah, just the culture that developed. And I think something that really gets me is like knowing that this was like a country that basically had all of its infrastructure bombed, and they're immediately trying to print like magazines and textbooks to like educate the people. Yeah. And then in the South, this is like a South Korean artist, but he was active during the war. So really like his life was of one Korea. And the tree on the right is like a naked tree that's awaiting spring. And so I feel like that's supposed to be like, in some ways, like the sadness or like I guess the destruction of the war, but hoping for spring, hoping for peace and reunification. And it's interesting to look at this one next to the next one, which is like a North Korean Soviet like realist painting of Reconstruction. So like the color palette, like the way that they're treated is just kind of cool.
Good art.
And then the next one I think is more modern, but again, like the theme of spring, like rebuilding. And then the next one is like the workers.
That's a hell of a piece of work. Good. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just really cool because I think the ink wash or like the brush strokes, like you can see connections to like the civilizational stuff that we saw before, but it's also very modern and new. And like mountains again.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's deep.
Prints, like woodcut, like blocks and like ink stuff. And then now it's like the South Korean striving for democracy. The picture on the right's from 1960 and the one on the left is 1980. So showing like, I think the military dictatorship and the people's response to it, the fact that the Korean people like in the South too, like didn't just want to accept what was happening. And in the 80s, we get some like people's movement art on the next slide. And so, yeah, it's interesting seeing some of the parallels, but then also the differences in the South Korean art and the North Korean art.
Yeah.
The next one too.
Yeah.
Because there are these like murals, which they're like really massive murals that I think a lot of students worked on collectively. And it shows the history of the national liberation movement, I think from the late 1800s to the present moment. And there are like a lot of these, and they're like on a really massive scale where they're almost murals, but they're like burned by the South Korean police. But it was interesting because in 1989, during the World Festival for Youth and Students, the North Koreans like reproduced it and actually exhibited it. Yeah. And then that's the 1989 conference where Im Soo-kyung went to the north, and she was a student.
Yes, it is.
You know him?
Yes, Damu.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
I know him. He was at the youth festival. Yeah.
Is he still alive?
No, he's not. No,
Oh,
he's not, sadly.
Okay.
But yeah. And then the next slide is like Im Soo-kyung and Kim Il-sung meeting, and you just see.
So this is a
Yeah.
young South Korean student who basically defied the South Korean government and went to North Korea to be part of this festival.
Yeah, and then she insisted, like on the way back, she basically insisted, like, I have to go back through the DMZ. Like, I'm not, because going there, I think she had to like go through Australia and like travel for 10 days across many different countries. And she was like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I'm going back, like straight back. And if you want to shoot me, like you can shoot me, but I'm going. So she went back that way, and then she had to go to prison for I think like 5-10 years, something like that. Yeah.
Nuri, just so everybody knows, we're talking about the youth festival. In fact, the last international youth festival in Pyongyang, North Korea in 1989.
Yep.
And there's Damu again. Wow. These are young people from the United States. And they're marching, it seems, in a solidarity march in Pyongyang, North Korea.
That's so intense.
And that young woman, just to, you know, she defied the South Korean government, which said no young people from South Korea should go to that youth. And she had to go through all of these countries defying her government. And then when she went back, they imprisoned her. Do we know her? We know her name, right?
Yeah, it's Im Soo-kyung, like Lim Soo-kyung with a K.
She's still alive. She's actually like a minor politician.
I don't know if she still is, but she was part of like the Korean National Assembly at some point. Yeah. There's a documentary about her, which is pretty good.
It's a North Korean produced documentary.
Yeah. But it's great because you can see like all of the young people of all of these different countries of the world all coming and all like having, I think, the spirit of like wanting to meet, wanting to learn. And it's true, like, why should South Korea be cut off from basically the rest of the entire world of young people? But I think this was, yeah, like basically this was the moment where I think in the South, there's a lot, like much the highest amount of, I think, consciousness and like being, like wanting to be part of the world. Yeah. And then, yeah, I'll drop the documentary link somewhere. But then we have like the summit. I think this was 2018, but it's just cool because you can see like the mountains in the background and like the advisors. And like, if you think of, I think 2006 was the first time the North and South Korean leaders ever met. And I think in 2018 was basically like the second time, like the second president who had ever like done that. And so it was a really big moment. And so we're still thinking about how to like end the exhibit, but we want to also like use the projector to like do a slideshow of like different images that we probably won't be able to print, but to sort of have a wider range. So this is a North Korean painting of that Buddhist like woodblock work that I talked about earlier. And then we have more mountains and landscape, like more Buddhist stuff. And then we have more North Korean art. So the left is like really recent North Korean calligraphy. And the left piece says like a dynamic era, like a dynamic new era, which I think is like this current era. And then the middle calligraphy piece says like a thing of Korea. And so the art of calligraphy is also, I think, pretty advanced, where you're using the brush strokes and like thinking about the proportion of shapes, but also like the mood that it's supposed to convey.
I got to bind you up.
Don't get me started, please. Please stop.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's really cool.
And then, yeah, like folk stuff, like mask dance. But it's just really cool how you see, I think, like the dynamism and like the movement, but also like the expressions of the people and stuff. So.
Yeah.
They don't teach that over here. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
There's never been, to our knowledge, an exhibit that shows the full progression of Korean civilization in this way. So that's why you have to come to our event to see a once-in-a-lifetime exhibit that is being put on by the Free School.
That's really good, yay!
But yeah, I guess it would be nice if Kathy and Purba could also say.
Are y'all able to hear me okay this time? Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, earlier there were some audio issues. Well, I appreciate that I feel like every time we sort of present the arc, we're like, oh, how do we really capture all these thousands of years of history? But then we're so tempted in this process once we started, hitting on these cross-cutting themes, like how early the call or sort of like striving for peace was really crystallized, and the arrival of Buddhism to the Korean Peninsula, but also all these innovations, contributions, knowledge, monuments that represented the consolidation of the people. Like that is so echoed in like the North Korean, or even all of these movements in the past few decades. Of Koreans on either side of the DMZ. So there's so much temptation to like just kind of see all of them together in an exhibition, but also wanting to sort of demonstrate that forward march through history that is made by the people. And so we're still working out or experimenting with different ways to, I think, present this, but at the same time, I think it's just been really beautiful to, I'll just say personally, like, we had learned a great deal about the story of Korea and through the event that we had done last year in March, but actually this time getting to really advance our knowledge in a very short amount of time, but actually a very fruitful amount of time. But also I think we've also grown quite a bit now that I think about it from our we were able to, like, the 10th anniversary, these notions of like the development or the rise of a people or civilization, or for peace, and where we are today, all of it I feel like shows that like we've been able to build a great deal off of the work we started then, or even much before, through our studies of Du Bois and Robeson and King. But I'm really excited. We're really excited, and I'm really grateful to have so many people working together on this. It's been a great experience. I don't know if Purba, you also wanted to add.
Well, I don't have very much to add. I only recently joined this group, and I think it already is phenomenal, the amount of work that has gone in, but also the ideological clarity that this exhibition is not just a thing in itself, but it has a broad and clear purpose. But also, just how much is not known about the Korean War, for instance, and how, the American people are kept from the truth about the Korean people and Korean civilization and what was done to them by imperialism. But that goes, I mean, it's so clear that goes against the tradition of Robeson, of Du Bois, who were talking about how, like Robeson, today morning we were talking about this. He says when he's accepting the Stalin Peace Prize, that, whenever the question of war and peace has been put squarely to the American people, they've always registered for peace. And so,
Wow.
The American people are separate from, the warmongers and the military industrial complex. And the American people were always for the progressive forward march of humanity. And that is, this tradition has, every possible attack has been made on that tradition. But this exhibition does such a great job of bringing forth the truth and the searching for what it means, what Korean civilization means, and what it has contributed and what it still has to contribute to world humanity. And so I'm really excited. This stuff is so cool.
It is. I'm like so glad that you guys are putting this entire event together. Like Mary was telling me last night, she was like, everybody in Free School is so amazing. And I'm like, yes, y'all are. And I think it's because it's the fact of like being able to know these movements and having them inside of our hearts,
Right.
and being a part of them ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And we not only know them, but we're willing to teach to the young generation today, to everybody who's also willing to come to our events, or even to the live streams, or even to the people who we interact with, to give them the same feeling that we feel like
Right.
after even just looking at that beautiful exhibition. Like, we are beyond, we're not just white, we're not confined to just being European, but we have this deep well of knowledge that are thousands of years old, that has beauty and real, like this kind of like eternal understanding. Like, we're a part of, like, you know, like the stories and traditions of like people that we haven't met before, but we're connected to. This is how like the Beauty and Dark Princess can come about. Like this, like the idea that even civilization can be beautiful can come about. That we're a part of like the worlds that we haven't met before, but are a part of us. Because another thing that I was thinking about was like the energy that this country is now using of the immigrant in institutions of knowledge, of colleges and things like that. Like in the Africology departments or in Black studies, I don't think there is that there's still like that energy that like the Chinese and all, you know, I'm just reflecting upon how this country is made up of so many different types of people, and it's not really just made up of between Black and white, but how because our peoples in the world have been colonized, how much that pushes back the growth that young people in a young country can have. And I think that the event is not only inspiring, but inspires because it's able to actualize or struggle towards being a part of like something that's new, something that is something that's new, but also true and relevant for today. And that's why King is important. That's why Paul Robeson is important for young people.
Yeah.
That's why the Koreaism is important and relevant for young people, and so on. Because I think that sometimes it can be like, oh, free school is just talking about like another, like, oh, why are they talking about Gandhi? Why are they talking about Russia and America? Why are they talking about Korea? Well, it's not just focusing on something that is irrelevant, but the actual discussion to be had. And I think a lot of times is being pushed away. Like a lot of times people do not want young people to know or talk about Gandhi or talk about Korea or anything like that. So the fact that we're having this discussion and also the event shows our courage. It shows our will to be able to struggle against the ruling class and at this time, and I really like commend like the event. I'm excited for it.
You're right.
Yeah, just to build quickly on what Serafina's saying, you know, when we were even talking about the exhibit that we just showed amongst each other, like I just had the realization that like whether it's like young Korean Americans or just young Americans in general, like your exposure to Korea is basically through South Korean pop culture or through like going to a museum and stumbling into like a East Asia exhibit that has some like Korean porcelain work. Like that is basically your knowledge that is presented to you of Korea. And we really want to use the exhibit, but also the event as a whole it's almost like reintroducing Korea to a whole new generation of young people, young Korean Americans, young Americans. And actually, yeah, it reminded me of the China event and this phrasing of like the rediscovery of China, like through the Black freedom movements, through this new knowledge framework. And I think this event is part of how I'm conceptualizing it in my brain is it's almost like an experiment to see if these an experiment to see if like Korean Americans, but more broadly, can Like, can the community of people who come from this heritage, can they become not just a people in themselves, but a people for the remaking of their broader American people, you know, armed with this knowledge? And so, yeah.
And I feel like the thing is that I've like, ever since I first came to like a free school conference, there's always been like culture. Like there's always been like the cultural performances, music, dance, like in the art exhibitions of like the last few years. And I feel like it's always been so central, which is that we don't just talk about it. Like we really try our best to like make it alive and to show it, like to really share it person to person, like eye to eye. And I just think that it's like, I think it actually is kind of like Serafina's presentation in the Black Reconstruction event, where like it's practice, like it's actually bringing into being and fruition, like what really is possible. And yeah, like it's just amazing because it's like, what option do you have? Like if you come to an event and you see it like alive, I feel like that's so much more compelling than like, oh, like it's a theoretical possibility. Yeah, so I'm just really excited for the event. And because I think that what we're trying to do is not just to challenge people, but to actually like bring them with us into basically the world of free school and all of the possibility that like we see, not just like far off, but literally right here, right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, oh, sorry, do you want to go? Yeah, I just want to say the exhibit, like the program is so beautiful and exciting, but then I feel like there's something about the exhibit and the way you talked about it, Nuri, that is like a whole nother level.
Yep.
And it's so emotional, like even that ending photo of that landscape in the back with the North Korean and South Korean leader, like that visual where we've shown you, you know, the importance of calligraphy and the landscapes. And then here you have this painting that, you know, both North and South Koreans together. There's something meaningful in that. And you have these peace talks in 2018. Like there's something, I don't know, it was just really, that's all I really wanted to say, was just that the way you also described the exhibit and the strivings of the Korean people who are one in their strivings. It's like there's something really beautiful about that. And I just had the idea that maybe it'd be cool to like give a sneak preview of that exhibition as part of the publicity for the event.
Yeah.
Because I even think it would be cool to like, as part of like, well, I know at Free School we've tried to do press releases for our events, but yeah, no, there's something very significant about saying we're going to be at the Asian Arts Initiative. We will have, possibly for the first time in the city of Philadelphia, an exhibition that talks about art of North and South Korea together. You know what I mean? Like I think that would be really beautiful. Yeah, and I think also just saying like in the exhibition, like actually having those thorough descriptions where you can like describe the arc, like that story, will be so important.
Yeah.
Emily, are there any people on the chat?
Oh, no.
There's lots of chatter.
Okay. Why don't we read some of them if you don't mind?
So Emil asks, what was the name of the DPRK documentary? You can put it in the, I'm gonna let you guys put in the chat. Nathan says, so excited for the event, guys. When we learn like this, I feel like we've rejoined the world. That was really beautiful. Sade says, this event will definitely weaken the ideologies of presentism and show people the humanity of Korea, which in reflection, humanity in ourselves. This will be so beautiful and healing. Thank you all.
Yay.
Yeah. And then Yvonne asks, will the exhibit be up beyond the Korean Symposium? That's a good question. I guess, honestly, you could ask. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think we have any place that we can, but it would be nice to find some way to do it. Yeah, and then also, I guess, just a quick plug. We are trying to fund the printing of this exhibit, so it would like we'd appreciate any donations, because the poster printing, like some things we want to do small, but like the worker painting, I think really should be done as like somewhat big. And so yeah, if whoever's watching, if you could donate to the GoFundMe or to the Venmo, that would be really amazing.
Sade says, I'm so excited, all caps. Phil Logan says, I love that Harlem photo. It demonstrates how much so-called Black leaders have betrayed their own history. A free Korea is a Korea without white supremacy.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
Yeah.
Dust James says, good morning. Stephen Palmier says, good morning. Yvonne from earlier says, Jahan, you will find Du Bois's reference to quote unquote world democracy in the chapter on Andromeda, page 256 in the paperback of The World in Africa. Nathan had an earlier comment and question that he says got answered, where he says, I'm excited for the Korea event, guys. I was wondering if you might go into how Korea renewed its civilization and or also advanced human civilization, sort of how when we were looking at Patrice Lumumba bringing life back to the French Revolution, but also advancing something new in the Congo and Africa. People talk about communism as an ideology of the old world that should have died with the Soviet Union, could see it as a path for the futures. Sade says, I didn't even have a qualitative teaching on Korea in high school. My world history instructors focused on how Europe and America opened up, quote unquote, opened up Asia through trade. I feel so mentally malnourished. And that's it. Oh, and Sade says, good morning. I'm tuning in from the audience because I'm getting my car serviced.
Could we quickly, maybe Anna could quickly talk about the outreach stuff too, if that's okay?
Yeah, just a quick thing. So our first flyering thing is actually going to be today in the afternoon or early evening. There's already a group chat for outreach, but if anybody is interested, please let somebody know. If you have my number, you can just let me know and I will add you to the group chat if you're not there already. Basically what we're going to be doing today and a few more times before the event is we're going to be flyering, we have posters that we're going to print out, but also talking to people at any opportunity that arises. I think it's going to happen most in the churches and some institutions, but also I think because of our focus on young people, I think today we'll be focusing on certain neighborhoods like Upper Darby, I think North Fifth Street up near Olney, because those have traditionally in Philadelphia been areas where there have been a lot of Korean Americans, but there are some other areas too. I'll put some more details into the chat again if you're interested. We do have enough people with cars already, so there's that. We really want to focus on going to, I think, places even restaurants, cafes where young people will sit down, hang out. And I don't know, I guess maybe this will be a segue into some other stuff later on, but I think when thinking about outreach, I do like the approach of focusing on in-person places. Especially because I also have come from an organizing and canvassing background from that I used to do years ago, and I think there are actually you do attract a certain kind of person when you do a lot of this work in person. When you focus on online outreach too much, I don't think it's a bad strategy, but I think if you only focus on to the exclusion of a lot of this organic in-person flyering, it kind of diminishes, I think, the way people can engage with the event and with the ideas. So I just wanted to put that out there for outreach.
Maybe we can move on to the debriefing and assessing our Black Reconstruction Symposium. It's kind of hard to transition because I'm so excited about the future now that I'm kind of oh, okay, yeah. I've moved on. I've moved on from our last event. I'm ready to do outreach this afternoon. But yeah, actually, listening to everyone talk about the upcoming Korea event almost makes me assess the Black Reconstruction Symposium differently. Where I think I'd love to hear other people's thoughts as well, but I think that our symposium was very successful because I think we went out in a lot of ways looking back towards last weekend. The Black Reconstruction Symposium, like beyond just the fact that everyone's presentations were so sharp and advanced and really clarified the ideological contradictions that confuse and then actually neutralize the potential of the American people in this moment. I also feel like what the event does is it also like it set the stage. Like one, I think what it accomplished was what we set out to do, which is to say that America has a revolutionary history, that we believe in the American people, that the American people in its history, especially the Black proletariat, like advanced the democratic struggle in this country. And that plays an important role in the world democratic struggle. And I feel like that's what the Korea event discussion really made me think about. But then I think the second thing is also just the question of war and peace. And how do you understand the moment we're in? And then also, like, how does it clarify how to see the American people and what side to be on in history, in this moment of history? But I felt the event was really successful. I thought the panels, I always feel like we could use more time for discussing. Like each panel could have been its own event. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll start there. For me, it was also the end, like that we were able to end the whole Black Reconstruction Symposium with this roundtable discussing the practical question of today. It is the question of what will the American people do in the face of war, but also us. Like, what will we do when we see, for example, a Rage Against the War Machine rally where it's people, very diverse peoples with different quote unquote political positions, but their main political position, human position, is against war, is against our own government, which is waging war against the people abroad and at home, and against the intelligence, the deep state intelligence apparatus. What will we do if Trump runs in 2024 as an independent, as the peace candidate? How do you see that? How do you assess that? I think that was really important to end the event very explicit like that. And also just the overwhelming feeling. I just think what's special about free school, which I think was really highlighted at the symposium, was our optimism. And I know for a lot of people that might sound, I just feel like in this time and age, people view optimism as like superficial or something, but I really don't think it is. That throughout our entire event, it doesn't matter how sharp we are, we always come from the assumption that we believe in our people. We believe in the people. We believe we have a revolutionary history, revolutionary figures like Du Bois to stand upon. And I just think like it was really moving for me to even like hear Noah from Midwestern Marks on the Midwestern Marks live stream where he was like reporting back on the event. It really meant a lot to me actually to hear him say that he was above all touched by our warmth and that we were very welcoming people, loving people. Because free school, it's like we don't just have ideological clarity. We don't just have a deep commitment to the ideological struggle in a time of war. What we have is also love. Like we believe in love. It comes from love for each other, love for the people, and we hope to work towards and begin to embody what King said was the beloved community. Those are some of my beginning thoughts, but I'd love to hear what other people thought of the Black Reconstruction Symposium.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that the purpose of political education is for the sake of growing. And and I think that I was also thinking a little bit back to the march. I'm like thinking about two things. Like, we had a particular perspective there, and it's not at the march. And I think that that's something to highlight apropos the Black Reconstruction event, because the Black Reconstruction event is also to develop thought, to develop what we're trying to say, to develop what is actually true, what to stand by, and like who to study, who to know, like what are the questions to ask, what is the way to phrase things. Working those problems out in a political sense is important, anywhere, anytime. And in reflection of the event that we had, I do also think that it was successful, not solely in the fact of like the turnout or the number of people, or even like how everything felt like it was working together. Like when we got to the event, or like to the church of St. Jude, Madre Jessie was already there, like in her pajamas, like ready to open up the door for us, because she, like, between all of us, has this love that we have for the people, have to, be able to change the world for the better, to do good.
To do good.
And I think that's what we carry very strongly, because that's really all of what we want to do. It's nothing, no other mission or malintent. And so having the event, I thought it was nice. And another thing to note, that Madre Jessie had help from members of her church in serving lunch to us, which I thought was really nice. And even the people who contributed to the event, like I think someone had come from Atlantic City, Eric something, but he was connected to Midwestern Mark somehow, or was watching them, and so he had come to the event. And I think what he was talking about was the possibility of this country becoming more mixed or interracial, and how and other things. But it's the fact that I'm pulling from is, the contribution that people had, or even Ransom, and saying like, I am a proletariat, I'm the Black proletariat, and so you've been talking about me all day. Those kind of justifications, I think, say that we are on the right track and that we're doing a good thing in the event. I think everybody's presentation, and the discussion that we had about the presentations, I guess we can say in retrospect, like, oh, we could have said something else better, or we could have done some, which is, but the thing is that when we do these kinds of projects, is the possibility of things coming up that we didn't even prepare for at all. Like the question of Trotskyism is now more clear in my mind, even though we've talked about it for years, pretty much. Now I'm like, oh, I know what a Trotskyite is, because they don't mean to say anything to advance our struggle for ideological clarity, but they want to take it down and disunify a group of people. And I think I could also talk a long time about like what we talked about, and like how everybody was able to come together. Like I'm talking about in the free school, able to present clear and honest statements. But I think in only saying that is to say that, we've prepared ourselves for this point, and then we'll continue to prepare ourselves as, the time that we're living in is ongoing, and the struggle that we're ensuing is going to continue, which is one, for ideological clarity, and two, for the democratic demands to also become concrete, and, develop people's knowledge in a more broad sense, in a complete way, so that we can actually have a new world to come to be. That we, in exemplifying this beloved community that we have first read about, that can be also enjoyed by everybody else in this country. So I'm glad that we were able to put that event together, and I'm glad to put more events together, because I think we're doing good work.
one of the things that was so impressive and exciting for me was that, in effect, with this symposium, we were saying, this is how to read Black Reconstruction. And we cannot be unmindful of the fact that Black Reconstruction and pretty much Du Bois are not taught in most African American studies departments, in history departments, and sociology departments. So young people are not learning this. And I don't think we should be naive. The universities have been completely taken over by counter-revolutionary and anti-revolutionary ideologies. And so we have to go outside of the university to teach Du Bois. And isn't that a shame? Shame on the university, shame on the professoriate, shame on African American studies. But we do it, and we do it well. To have the theme, the Black proletariat. Well, some people would say, well, you're getting that from Marx. No, that is in Black Reconstruction. That is its central organizing, theoretical, philosophical position. I guess the other thing I would say is the spirit of the symposium was a spirit of debate, a spirit of we're not going to all agree. And of course, there are people who have varying approaches to Marxism. And of course, we are saying that science is a dialectical and evolving process, that to understand the potentiality and possibilities of an American people, you have to see Black Reconstruction, you have to know Du Bois, you have to see the central role in American history since the Civil War of the Black proletariat. And that's why it was so dramatic for Ransom to say, I am the Black proletariat. I worked for 47 years at Temple University Hospital, or for Noah to say, I'm a carpenter from Ohio, and others to identify their class position, and for us to identify the overarching ideological issue for people who claim to be revolutionaries. No Du Bois, no revolutionary theory. No Black Reconstruction, no revolutionary theory. And of course, the theme that I think, and I was discussing this with Emily and Serafina, I guess other people, this theme on our hoodies with W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King, we march to achieve our nation. People don't realize there are three people. There's Du Bois, there's King, and achieving our nation or achieving our country is directly from James Baldwin. There are a couple more things. The whole question of democracy, and this is confused among the quote unquote left. What is democracy? I think that we have gone away in defining it as achieving our nation, remaking our people, remaking our nation. That is the democratic task before the American people. It cannot be put off for another day. Some people will say, well, the principal democratic task is the right for workers to organize. That's a part of it, but it is not the overarching task.
Towards what, right?
Yeah, the task of democracy for the American people is to achieve our nation, to once again achieve our revolutionary legacy for this time, and to fight for that. And there's so much confusion about this, but you cannot understand that without understanding Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America, King, and then and Baldwin. And what it's not once it's presented, it's so clarifying and so clear that you almost say, well, why didn't I see it all the time? But this, I thought it was a phenomenal event. I dare say, and this is not arrogance of the free school, nothing close to this has been held on Reconstruction or Black Reconstruction. I've listened and read a lot of current commentary of people talking about Reconstruction and Black Reconstruction. Nothing comes close to that symposium. Nowhere near it. Nowhere close to it. And of course, Madre Jessie and her wonderful congregation. How, for the free school to do what we do, we must work with people, be it the Church of the Overcomer, the Church of the Crucifixion, Asian Arts Initiative, and we're always looking for new churches to work with. But when a church and its congregation opens its doors to you, when the pastor of a church does something that is very much rooted in Christianity and the life of Christ, that is the rector, the pastor, serving her guests food. This was a very moving, very humbling thing, a very profound gesture. Madre Jessie is Puerto Rican, lived a good part of her life in Puerto Rico. The man who was helping her serve us is also from Puerto Rico. He now lives in Philadelphia. And the woman who was helping her was from Mexico. It makes you love the people that much more. It makes you begin to see what is deep in the soul of our people. How they struggle in small ways to achieve our nation, to achieve our people, to make a new people. I can't, it was a wonderful event, unprecedented. Few have the courage to politically or theoretically go where we went. That is the Black proletariat and the future of an American revolution. I mean, even the title, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a genius to see where that is going and see what inspires it. So I'll stop there. Thank you to everyone that organized. Can I just say one other thing? Yeah, this, if everybody could see this. This was done by Kathy and Alice Lee, and I don't know who the other people are that put this together. This is a work of art and a work of genius and a small encyclopedia of Black Reconstruction. And going forward, we have to find ways to use it, to distribute it to churches, in colleges. They need this more than they need anything. College students, graduate students, community organizations who want to understand this complex book. And the art is so impressive. It is such a beautiful thing that we have to share it, use it as a mechanism of political education of the people. So I'll stop there. It's so unbelievable. Unfucking believable.
Yeah, I wanted to say, like something Serafina mentioned, it got me thinking, I think you're talking about, Trotskyism, but it also got me thinking about, this question of, I think it was mentioned earlier in the morning about, the Korean art exhibit. And I'm not trying to go back to that, but this question of, how many facts do we actually know? And, what's the relationship, between what we understand to be the truth and a numerous horde of facts. And I think I was thinking how this question of we need there are different kinds of facts, and the relationship between facts and a worldview or an ideology is something that needs to be verified, because there are facts which the purpose of which is to understand the world, and then there are those the purpose of which is to distort you from this the process of understanding it. And I was thinking what Serafina was saying, this with the project of Trotskyism seems in many ways it is basically a put down, is what she said. And yeah, it's the whole purpose of it is to yeah, I think obscure from understanding what the revolutionary process looks like.
Right.
And actually since it was mentioned at the event, I think somebody mentioned Lenin's letter to the American workers. And I was looking at that, and what he talks about, he wrote this in 1918, and he says the American Civil War was the most revolutionary movement of modern times. And that is saying something. And he also says this question of how we see the revolutionary process, and how in hindsight there is this tendency, when he was trying to articulate this tendency that was already there, to sort of view revolutionary process in a straight-jacketed fashion, where you want to identify okay, these are the clean ways forward, and these are the ways to identify. And if this is not the case, this is not a revolutionary project. And I think, yeah, I mean, the event, and all the discussions we've had after, and also the dialogue that went on during the event, because of different forces at it, I think it also clarified this project of Trotskyism, because that is
Right.
exactly what the Trotsky position is, that you want to take down and dismiss revolutionary projects because it does not adhere to your idea of what the clean path forward is. And this is the opposite of the revolutionary task. I mean, it's always, the revolutionary task is to identify a way forward despite difficulties. And this is yeah, it's it seems to come as I always used to think of Trotskyism as something, I mean, I didn't fully understand, but I also thought of it as more in the realm of an academic difference, but it has real life consequences.
Mhm.
And like it has been identified for like over 100 years clearly, but like I think now we are seeing its current form. And I do appreciate this distinction that was very clearly brought out, like at the event. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I've really been just processing everything from that conference, and also this conference feels like it's really strongly another step in this kind of huge structure that started maybe 7 or 8 months ago with all the conferences we've been having from. I mean, these past few months, I think, like I guess 7 to 8 months have really been powerful in terms of it's like free school just taking leaps, and like I think starting from Azadi to 10th anniversary to the previous conferences, this conference, and just ideologically, moving so quickly. And I really, really feel it. I think, and this particularly with Black Reconstruction, on top of everything else we've been doing, I've been trying to understand how I can even describe it, and it feels to me like taking like some kind of quantum leap.
Yeah.
Like like
Yeah.
we're entering a new realm, like how quantum physics is a new realm of physics. Feels that's the best description I can come up with. I don't know if someone has a better description from science, but yeah.
Oh, Trump announced his plan for America, which he calls a quantum leap for America.
Okay.
Nice. Was that about reindustrializing cities or something? I saw a little bit today. I didn't see the title. That's interesting. But which also reminds me, by the way, the Korea exhibit, you probably will have to put that picture of Trump stepping into North Korea. but so the point I was trying to say is well, getting in, although we've read Black Reconstruction over the years, and I think that was very important. And now we're getting into a period of where a lot of that is paying off, and we're getting this rapid understanding of the book and its dynamics, and all these concepts. I mean, we've been talking about the Black worker, the whole idea of the concrete universal and abstract universal, and the ways in which we've been able we are so above these kind of infantile, pedantic, left-wing understandings of U.S. society. It's really, I think, something very significant, and I think other people also can sense that. And I mean, you even see with like Midwestern Marx, for example, the impact of the ideas of free school, like that other people now are talking about Henry Winston. Other people are talking about Du Bois as a father of American Marxism and broader understanding of revolution in the United States. And just even now, what Doc was saying about, I was very struck by about how this thing of achieving our nation, which I also think is a huge leap in our understanding. And the fact that concretely you can see it in the work of people like Mother Jessie and her congregants, and that the people are doing this work in institutions like these churches and so on every day. And this ideology, this analysis provides a framework for them to understand what they've already been doing and how people can come together. It's just, I'm just blown away by the whole thing. And really just sitting with it and continuing. And I think now quickly we're going into a with the Korea event, another another rung on this ladder, another step that but it's so connected. You can understand it. It's so clear when you get into it, and just these logical leaps of philosophical understanding. It's so significant.
I just wanted to add a small bit is that with every conference, I feel like we are making the moral choice clearer and clearer. And I think a lot of people tend to think about the rational and the moral as very separate things. But the more you read somebody like Du Bois, the more you read Robeson, I mean, it becomes very clear that you can't really be rational unless you're moral. And a lot of these questions are, I mean, this is exactly what I feel when I read Gerald Horn, that you don't have any rational analysis. I don't even I'm suspicious if you're even trying to, but say you tried but you failed, you have no rational analysis. But I mean, it is ultimately related to the fact that you're not making moral choices. You're not recognizing the moral imperative. And I think I think every single time it's becoming clearer and clearer, this achieving of our nation. What does American civilization mean? What is the revolutionary process going to move towards? Um, a lot of this is about individual people really figuring out for themselves that there is something to strive for. There is something that is true, that is right. And this is not just like a battle of many ideas and narratives, and the one who can argue best or shout the loudest wins. No. So every single time, that's why, I feel like, my faith in what we're doing and faith in the future just gets solidified with every single conference. And yeah.
Just to add to what everyone else is saying, the feeling that you can concretely like grasp the movement of history, I think was really exemplified even by, for example, Dr. Caroline at the end, where she's like, "Give us the plan, Dr. Montero. Give us the call to action." Because I think just overcome with this feeling of knowing and believing, believing from knowing, not just blind optimism. I can imagine as an older person, you can better reinterpret the life that you live when you know this great period of Reconstruction leading towards the civil rights movement, and as a young person, you can feel a connection to this great period that you want to renew. And so now I think in addition to the big brain feeling, the strong belief, I think is impossible to renew. And so very grateful for this conference.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I always like seeing who comes too. And I was really touched by like not just the fact that like Aaron from Platypus came from New York, and all these other like I think 5 or 7 people came from New York to our event, or Noah from Midwestern Marks driving from Cleveland, like 7-8 hours from Cleveland to come. But also there was this one guy from Atlantic City, New Jersey, who came with the cane, and Jahan told me that he used to be in intelligence and like he worked for the military. But I just really loved watching his reactions to the event. Like I was specifically watching his reactions, and I was watching Ransom's reactions and Pastor Keith's reactions. And there's something just so beautiful about being in the sanctuary of Madre Jesse's church. A beautiful church, like very like, I don't know, to me it's that kind of like a church that really reminds me of New England.
Yeah.
And like and I don't know like why I'm very attached to that church, but seeing everyone there with that lighting, and I really felt like for the first time we achieved like a space where it really felt like a discussion, like a circle. It felt like a circle to me. And I remember when the guy from Atlantic City came up to speak at the roundtable, he commented where he said, you could tell he was just moved by the whole day, the ideological discussion, like the discussion that has implications on politics, basically, where he said he was like, I commend the fact that we're even speaking up. You know what I mean? Like he had so much heart in it. And I was really moved by that. Yeah, I remember like what Serafina said earlier too about how Ransom was like at the end, he felt so emboldened to say like, he declared like, I am the Black proletariat. Like I am, like, I don't even know how else to say it. Like and then he said, he was like, he also said the same thing kind of like, where I think his question that I don't know if we completely answered, his question was like, well, what is the solution? What will we do? But it was him saying like, let's get to work. Like, what are we, you know what I mean? And so.
Wait, I also just wanted to add, it was our first event in that church, and I also really like this church in particular. And I agree with Emily that it felt like, I think it's also because of the way that free school is developing, and the way that we've kind of played with structuring our events in a new way, but I felt like we achieved something qualitatively new and something very special in that space. And it was a beautiful space to be in. Like, I'm very honored that Madre Jessie opened it up for us. And I really liked that. I know for me, it took me to a new neighborhood of Philadelphia, but that is Philadelphia, Lafayette Hill. So yeah, I really enjoyed being there as well.
Yeah, I felt like everyone was giving testimonies at the end, like just towards the end. Okay. I felt like everyone was giving testimonies at the end, like when they were moved to speak. I thought it was really cool, just like getting up and speaking and talking, especially towards a round table, like a whole conversation around in the church.
Yeah, it was like having free school, but in a church, and like it's a whole event, everybody there, and we were all really trying to get to the bottom. Like, we weren't just posing questions that we were like, oh well, these are just questions, but we were ready to really try to resolve them the best that we could that day, and know that we had to continue. And what we built was the foundation to be able to keep discussing this and get closer to people. Oh yeah, we probably had something.
Yeah, I think something that I'm just now realizing, and this is inspired by the conversation that we're having, is that I think both the 10th anniversary, but also this event, it just makes you appreciate the fact that these ideas that we talk about every Saturday and in our various reading groups, and we've been working on so hard, like, they are intense. Like, they're intense ideas, but they're not fundamentally things which are alien to the life worlds of everyday people. And I think what we can provide is a space and a forum for the people to actually work these things out, and to work it out in a way which is actually like organic to them and their life worlds. And yeah, like I had like many feelings, many thoughts after the event, but just like that fact, I think, it's just becoming very concrete to me now. That we're not sitting above, like someplace above, but actually these ideas, it's like, to the extent, like, even, like the second panel, Lenin and Du Bois, to the extent that the American people can understand on their own terms the relevance and what they can learn from someone like V.I. Lenin, it's because they have their own revolutionary traditions and revolutionary capacity. Like, that is what makes them equipped to grasp, like, what should the essence of, like, what you can draw from someone like Lenin and the Russian Revolution, and not in a dogmatic way, but in a way that actually makes sense for, like, where we are right now and what are the possibilities. And yeah, I mean, obviously the same goes for Du Bois. It's like, I think I just appreciated having the chance to, even for like the presentation that I was working on, to like try to just like work these things out, but also because, like, it just became really clear that you can't understand, like, first of all, the American people today without the civil rights movement, and you can't understand the civil rights movement without Du Bois. It just, like, all those things are so, like, they just became very clear to me, like, through the event and getting to work on that, and that we have, it's like you could say that Du Bois inductively generated certain hypotheses, and that the civil rights movement was testing those hypotheses, and that the time calls again for a testing of those hypotheses, like what you've been saying in the free school, but it's just like in a very concrete way. Like, this is what we're doing with our events, but also just with the relationships that we're building with all of these people, these people's institutions, and the churches and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, if I had to say, there was one thing I was really happy about that came out explicitly. Like, I totally second what you're saying, Jeremiah, about how important our weekly discussions are. Because I feel like at that event, it was like a lot became so explicit and crystallized, and everything that we had discussed, it was almost like, what's that word, like condensed, like when something is so like concentrated, like it's like we're able to concentrate, like the truth that we work so hard at getting at every week in these discussions was so concentrated in that one day symposium. And the thing that the point that I was really happy that we were able to make was a point you made, Doc, at the roundtable, where you said it actually had to do with, I think, what Du Bois, the real revolutionary essence of Du Bois and the power of what he says and the impact it has on someone like King, is that in America, what is revolutionary is not going to be quote unquote Marxism. That what is revolutionary is what is exemplified by the Black proletariat in leading the whole proletariat. Like that is the revolutionary process. That is what is revolutionary. And I think you said it, Doc, at the roundtable, how, and it's so like beautiful, almost like divine, that this event, you were able to have Ransom, Pastor Keith, Pastor Carolyn, that random guy from Atlantic City. But when you made the point, Doc, where you said, but here's the thing, would Pastor Keith, who does all this work, call himself a Marxist?
Right.
No, he would call himself a freedom fighter.
Right.
And that's what Du Bois, that's Du Bois' science. That's the ideological leap, the importance of Du Bois, where he was saying it's not separated. It's not at all separated from Marxism or class struggle or Leninism or anything like that. But that Du Bois has a new framework, a new science, a new way of understanding how we should understand what's happening. Where Pastor Keith and Carolyn don't call themselves Marxists or even communists, but they're not opposed to Marxism, they're not opposed to communism, but they would say, I'm a freedom fighter. I love my people. I'm interested in freedom. Or someone like Ransom, who would say, I'm actually really excited by these ideas of Marxism, communism. But at the end of the day, I would say I'm a Black proletariat. Like, and yeah, it was kind of beautiful that a lot of things that we had talked were suddenly being seen in the concrete. Like the way Jeremiah was saying, in some ways it was an experiment unfolding, but unfolding, like, what's the phrase? Like unfolding beneath my eyes, like unfolding in front of me. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and that is the one point. Like, I think that is a really crucial, like, I'm so happy that like we were able to make that point at the end of the day, that here's Du Bois, his knowledge, the knowledge categories that you can find in his Black Reconstruction that explains revolution, like explains what is revolutionary. Because then I also loved Samir's question at the end. Like we were able to address the question of, well, what's left and what's right, and does any of it matter today? Samir was like, well, would you say that the right is where we head? No. Like, see, that's the question. It's like, when you look at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, what's left and right doesn't quite matter anymore. When everyone is explicitly saying, down with the CIA. Let's end, like, I'm calling for an end to the CIA. I'm calling for an end to imperialism and war. Like, it's not really about left and right anymore. There's something new emerging. And I actually think you can only see it when you use Du Bois. Like, Du Bois is so necessary to understand, like, what's happening to us today. And actually, I think Du Bois is not just important for America. Du Bois is really important for the world.
Yes.
To even understand, like, what's happening in India or Korea or China, you know, or even Russia, to be able to take the stand for Russia. To say, and not just fall into, like, because this rally that's happening in March, they're saying, like, oh, we want peace in Ukraine, but what does that mean? What does peace really mean if you don't take a stand, like a stand against NATO, and say that, well, Russia was being challenged, Russia was being pushed to the edge by NATO. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Oh, and also that, yeah, to also say that the whole Trotskyism, like, I was really, just like everyone else, I really, like Shimbarto said it well when he was like, I thought Trotskyism was more of like an academic difference. I always was like, I don't get what's the big deal with like, why do we have to criticize Trotsky? But now I understand because it even helps explain, I think, the March rally, to be honest. To me, it helps explain the March rally. And I mean, we'll get into that discussion, but.
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of like going to that discussion a bit in my mind because I was listening to like the People's Party fundraising the march, and one of the things that
the February 19th.
The February 19th. Has nothing to do with March. The March in March.
Yeah.
Because she had said the same thing that you're saying, Emily, which is like, and the same thing Tulsi said that Sade grappled onto. Like, it doesn't matter what side of left, right, but for life, we stand to live, for generations to live. And I appreciate that you emphasize that point because there was a reason why, like, we're thinking very clearly. I feel like we're thinking very clearly after, like, the one day symposium that we had. Like, we have more confidence in what we're saying and also understanding of how to move going forward. But I just wanted to underline what you're saying about, well, really there is no left, right, so where do you go besides the Bois?
Yeah, this is so interesting what Serafina said. And I think, after, I was saying, I always say this, I find myself just looking and listening to you all because I'm so fascinated by you all for all kind of reasons that we won't go into right now. But, okay, I come up in a generation, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the rise of the Black Panther Party, and then a long period of at least 40 years now where the left is a self-defined political category. I'm left or I'm revolutionary because I say so. And there are no theoretical, philosophical, or ideological criteria. You understand what I'm saying? And this gets us into that whole discussion of the collapse of the world communist movement that did represent a global left movement, and which brings us to Trotskyism. And I know this is a difficult discussion to have because many people in the West and in the United States want Trotsky to be something he never was, and Trotskyism to be something it never could be. And I'm not making this up. I'm not trying to be a wordsmith or anything like that. But by the 1960s, even the possibility that the Trotskyists had dreamed of Trotskyism being a world movement, had been nullified. Let me put that again. See, Trotskyism imagined itself as the alternative to the world communist movement and the Soviet Union, what they called Stalinism. I put quotes around that. They, in fact, and this gets into a lot of history that a lot in the Western left don't want to discuss, that envoys of Leon Trotsky himself were figuring out ways to connect with the German government and to be, how should I put this? Because they believed that a war between Germany and the Soviet Union would advance the class struggle. That, in other words, the weakening of quote, Stalinism was in the interest of the world revolutionary process. Therefore, while the world, as Hitler moved towards the Soviet Union, were forming popular and united fronts to galvanize their people against Hitler and against the German war against the Soviet Union. In other words, and here is the key that might be an analog to what we're experiencing right now, that the defense of the Soviet Union was the defense of the world working class and of democracy. That was what the issue was, just like today.
Yes.
The defense of Russia against Western imperialism is the defense of democracy, is the defense of the working class. And for the world communist movement, there was no equivocation. For Trotskyists and Trotsky himself, they propagandized. And of course, the Western media made Trotsky a hero because of this idea that the Trotskyists had no position, or said they had no position, on the defense of the Soviet Union against Nazism. In the United States, leading Trotskyists, and I don't know how many, because there's all of this secret stuff that they carry on, what I call nickel and dime espionage. You know, what was their position on World War II? I know that, for example, C.L.R. James made it very clear that he was not going to get involved in either what they call the Popular Front or the war effort. Made it very clear. Now, this brings up another topic, and they always bring this up, the quote, Popular Front, as the undermining of the working class. Now, without going into a lot of detail about it, with the victory of the Soviet Union and the anti-Nazi forces at great expense, 27 million Soviet citizens, 50 million Europeans killed, 30 million Chinese and Koreans and others killed in the war of Japanese occupation. We can never forget these losses and this tremendous sacrifice. And in each instance, be it the Communist Party of China, the Liberation Forces in Korea and Vietnam, the popular forces in the Western countries, some of which were occupied, you know, the world communist movement stepped up. There's no two ways about it. Western propaganda still tries to deny it. The United States lost less than 500,000 people in both wars, in Europe and the Pacific, the majority in the Pacific, where the US had defined its interest. But yet they try to make like it was they who saved, quote, democracy, when 27 million Soviet citizens were killed.
Wow.
We cannot forget this sacrifice. For Trotskyism, therefore, after World War II, and certainly through the 1950s, they were increasingly discredited. So they formed this I don't know what you could call it, fake organization called the Fourth International, made up only of Trotskyists who argued, fussed, and fought with each other and kept making all these splits. By the 1960s, throughout the world, especially in the zones of national liberation in Africa and Asia, you couldn't find a Trotskyist. They were completely discredited. So they existed in certain European capitals. And then, in the late 1960s and 70s, a group of Trotskyists split off. One split was a split of those who ultimately became what we today call the neocons. And the Trotskyist concept of permanent revolution was then replaced with the concept of permanent wars.
Wow.
But then the major Trotskyist organization, the Socialist Workers' Party, which got a bump up in the anti-war movement because there were students who were protesting the draft. And the SWP, I guess to its credit, had resources, a newspaper, an organization, and they seized upon the student movement and became a principal organizer of the anti-draft movement. Again, this might be an analogy for what we're seeing today, and then said that they were the anti-war movement, that the anti-war movement was a student movement, and that to expand it to include the working people, the African American struggle, etc., was, I don't know that they used this word, but in essence, to dilute the anti-war movement. But the point was, they did not want to, quote, dilute their power in the anti-war movement. Does that make sense?
Yes.
A politics that is self-serving and narcissistic. Sound familiar? But they are discredited. They would split. Out of the Socialist Workers' Party came the Workers' World Party. Out of the Workers' World Party came the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And then out of that, or one of them, came the Socialist Alternative. Well, they always split. They have problems with unity because, and this might sound familiar, they have always, to my observation, had purity conditions. Who was the most pure? Who was the most Trotskyist of the Trotskyists? Always. And so a discredited ideology, which does not want to accept that it will be part of the dustbin of history, doesn't want to accept it. So they rebrand, they clothe themselves. And that's why I use the word neo-Trotskyist. Trotskyism without always using the name Trotsky, because it's discredited. But the practice is the same, which makes difficult going forward. You have one march, which is an attempt at unity and coalition across boundaries of traditional left and right, whatever that means. And that's unacceptable to a certain kind of Trotskyists. We want a purity test. We want you to clear whatever you're doing with us first, because we represent the peace movement. I mean, when I look at this, it throws me back into my days. It is not that different. They always behave that way, and I am prepared. Any of those who disagree, let's debate it. And I'll say this, they're not the most truthful people about their own history and their own practice. Let's talk about it. But if they don't want to talk, we should talk about it, because there are consequences at this moment. There are consequences to these splitting tactics. And you all have always engaged in them. Always. And this is why, they have been so hated throughout the world. There is no national liberation movement. From Cuba to Hanoi to South Africa to Angola to the People's Republic of the nowhere have their ideas, but better their tactics, been accepted. They have been rejected. Their greatest strongholds, quite interestingly, are in the very places where imperialism is the strongest, where the contestation with imperialism reaches higher levels. They are not there because they're expelled, because of their splitting and disunifying tactics. And of course, when there was the world communist movement, there was no space for them. But, and here is another consequence of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the world communist movement: Trotskyism and Trotskyists. Well, of course, you get the hardcore, I'm a pure Trotskyist. But those who had to deal with the mass movements and the people, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the world communist movement, saw this as an opportunity. And I'll just say one last thing, and forgive me for talking a little too long. So when they, in previous periods, in periods of their extreme sectarian politics, would always talk about Trotsky and Stalinism, and Stalinists killed Leon Trotsky, and Trotsky founded the Red Army, and Trotsky was closer to Lenin, and Lenin warned against all of that. All of that talk, I'll say that. Well, suddenly, since they don't have communism anymore, so they thought they didn't, they are going to replace or be the communist movement in this period. So suddenly, Trotskyists, who never called themselves communists to my mind, they would call themselves workers' parties, socialists, revolutionary socialists, but never communist, right? Suddenly now, and I won't name parties or people, they're communist. And then they tried to imitate the culture and political practice of the communist parties in the 30s and 40s and all of that. But it is just an imitation. And this is what, in a certain sense, became disappointing for me, when they revealed their true colors. And I think, and we do have a problem going forward. Of course, we won't be able to go to the March demonstration because we're having this conference and had been planning it for some time. But that is not the big question. Why an alternative march? Is it a march for peace, or is it a march to nullify the march that already took place?
Right.
Is it a march, and I put quotes, coalition, because some of these organizations are so small. I mean, like the Universal African Self-Determination Collective. Please give me a break. In downtown Milwaukee. This is not United Front. This is a fraud. But is it a march for peace, or is it a march to nullify the coalition that took place on February 19th? Is the smearing of the march on the 19th a part of a larger tactic of undermining the possibility of a broad united front against war and for democracy? Are you doing this because there was a march on February 19th? And if you are doing it for that reason, there is every reason not to support it and to criticize it. Let me tell you this. I can't remember the exact march, but this was done also in a previous time, in the war against, in the movement against the war in Vietnam, where they would, the Socialist Workers' Party at that time, have competing marches. You know what I'm saying? Always. They put themselves first. Now, the other thing is what I called neo-cultural nationalism. I called it that because people wouldn't understand Henry Winston's concept of neo-Pan-Africanism. But cultural nationalists, who also had a makeover. And suddenly, cultural nationalists became the Black left. I saw it with my own eyes. I mean, part of the problem was, and this happened, am I talking too long? Let me just this history. You know, in 1974 in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, there was an event called the Sixth Pan-African Congress. You know, the fifth took place in 1945 in England, in Manchester. Du Bois was the honorary chairman and seen as the father of modern Pan-Africanism. This one was an attempt to impose a neo-Pan-Africanism on the African continent, under the guise of a Sixth Pan-African Congress. I was there. There was a repudiation of them, a profound repudiation that this, and they stated the line of march of Africa is in alignment with the world revolutionary process. Africa is not separate from humanity, etc., etc., etc. A complete repudiation. In the wake of that, led by the great poet and intellectual Amiri Baraka, who himself was a part of cultural nationalism, broke with that. And like, in a way that I don't know how he could do it so quickly, he became a communist. And I'm not making this up, but he became a Marxist-Leninist Mao Zedong thought. He couldn't go all the way to where, you know, so he becomes a communist. And then a process of cultural nationalists breaking with cultural nationalism, which was now discredited on the African continent, and becoming communist and radicals and left. The residue of that is still active. So you get this thing of people who have never reckoned or self-critically engaged what they were in relationship to what they claim they want to be. Never reckoned with it. So if you were a cultural nationalist in your previous life, what relationship does that have to who you say you are now? And more than that, What do you say to those of us that were smeared and attacked by you all as not being, quote, Black enough in this new moment? Never, ever anything said. I don't want people to get down on their knees and apologize for anything, but be a grown up about it and say, we were wrong. It was, self-critique, but no. They take their cultural nationalists, i.e., the struggle of Black people is not to free themselves and hence humanity from world imperialism, but to go into our own tent and uphold our identity with language and theories about internal colonialism, which was the predecessor to settler colonialism, or ideas about the world is against Black people. Everybody that's not Black is anti-Black. And hence, like the Trotskyists, a wedge and dividing force. And they were that. They, you all know about my own situation at Temple, where a cat that had suppressed the most virulent forms of cultural nationalism, when it came to me, came out of the closet and said, Tony's nothing but a communist. Nothing but a communist. Do you understand? But this is who he is and what they are and what the neocultural nationalists are. And hence, again, I will say it to them, and in public debate, I will say it. And let's, if you want to get clear, ideological, let's do it. But then, to smear and to attack an emerging movement, what I call a peace movement of a new type, as something that it is not. This was not a right-wing co-optation of peace and anti-war. This was not a right-wing co-optation of, quote, our movement, like you own a movement, like you own slogans. I condemn the cultural nationalists. The past, I condemn them now. And I want to remind them that some of us have a memory, and some of us stand on principle. Everybody is not trying to be, quote, popular with you. If you want to change, I'm open. But don't come with that nickel and dime stuff. I've seen it before. And I'll end on this. I did this. I'm gonna shut my mouth. But I did this interview with Jared Ball, which in some ways was positive, in other ways was not, I have to say. And he kind of wanted to apologize to me that he did not do enough when I was struggling for my job. And I said, no, don't see me as a victim. I see myself as a revolutionary, and I'm not surprised when anti-revolutionaries attack revolutionaries. That's what they do. That's what they're paid to do. You know what I'm saying? And I said, bigger than me, what Asante did is a wound upon the Black intelligentsia, upon the Black academics, an unhealed wound.
Yeah.
And until these young so-called radicals, so-called Black academics reckon with this, you see what I'm saying? That wound will go unhealed. And they don't choose to reckon with it. But we must reckon with it, because we are not We don't confine our work or centralize our work in universities and trying to get tenure, trying to curry favor with counter-revolutionaries. That's the freedom that we have, you know? But there are real-world consequences at this time where U.S. imperialism, and I said this to Jared, forgive me for talking, I said, you know, it is, quote, our imperialism, the imperialism that rules our country. Now, a lot of them say, well, this is not my country. But yes, it is your country. It is your country. You ain't going to travel nowhere else in the world without a passport from this country. This is where we are, and we are responsible. And when I say responsible for the struggle against our imperialism. And I said to Jared, I said the imperialism that assassinated Patrice Lumumba, the imperialism that assassinated Amilcar Cabral, that overthrew Kwame Nkrumah. Let us go down the record. The imperialism that dropped more bombs in Vietnam than were dropped in all of World War II. This is what we have to deal with. And there is no, quote, black anything that overrides humanity's general interest in preventing nuclear war. And all of this, you black and you blacker than black, you nothing. Excuse my, forgive me. No, this idea, you see, and I'll end here. This is what I want to say. It was always this kind of splitting tactics behind the claim of we represent black people, when they don't represent anybody in any way, shape, or form. So we have the, quote, moral authority to undermine a peace effort because we represent black people. And, you know, this is kind of what we're faced with on the fringes. The main trend among the American people is trying to find a way to prevent war, to get out of this war in Ukraine, and to find a path to democracy, a new people. That's all I want to say. Forgive me, I talk too much, but I think
Yeah, there are a lot of comments which I could read, but I think I wanted to add to your point, Doc, about this rally and march, which is that, like, when we were talking, it also made me realize, like, if we were to take this march in good faith, my question is also, are you going to acknowledge the February march? Okay, like, so you're having your march in March. Are you going to acknowledge the accomplishments of the February march and say that you are connected to it?
yes.
If you are genuinely against war in Russia and Ukraine, then are you going to acknowledge the accomplishments of the February march? Or are you going to separate yourself and actually degrade the February march? That's also, you know, that's my question. I'm kind of curious to see if they say anything about the February march. And then my second thing is, it made me also think about King, because like King in 1967, when he gave his Riverside speech, he even said, I'm finally in good conscience. I can no longer stay silent and not stand with all the students, all the other anti-war activists who already are taking a stand against the Vietnam War, against the draft. And King says, let me join with you. And in some ways he's saying, I'm sorry I didn't join sooner, but I must join you now.
Yes.
That's totally opposite of the attitude of anyone, you know, today in the name of being Black or in the name of being progressive or radical or leftist or whatever. It's totally opposite of King's spirit. And that was another thing I realized. I was like, actually, when I thought about it, I was like, King didn't say, like, King never said, "Oh, these white students are so white, and I'm not going to bring like my movement into." No, he said, he was like, "I cannot, in good conscience, not stand with you. I must join humanity in taking a stand against this war. I must join my fellow Americans in taking a stand against this war."
That's right. That's right.
But if no one else has anything else to say, I'd like to. Oh, go ahead, Jahan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say on this topic. In many ways, it was appropriate that we had our debate about Trotskyism at the conference right after the march and the fallout from the march, because as Doc and others have been pointing to, this whole trend of neo-Trotskyism is re-emerging. And I would like to say, well, first of all, this point is very important about neo-Trotskyism, that many of these groups have had this makeover, as Doc was saying, that they're no longer branding themselves as Trotskyists. And in fact, people were asking me even after the conference, like, how can you call these groups like Answer Coalition or PSL neo-Trotskyists? They would never identify themselves as that. Well, first of all, you have just a historical record and the fact that they emerged from the Trotskyist movement. But second of all, as Doc was saying, it's also about the strategy, the tactics of kind of extreme subjectivism and substitutionalism, seeing themselves as substituting and taking the place of the actual movement. And I think that this applies to the neo-Trotskyism, or what I sometimes call crypto-Trotskyism, because they try to cover up the fact that they're Trotskyists. But also, the second point about neo-cultural nationalism, I think is also very important. And there's a great deal of overlap. And I mean, basically a convergence between these two forces of neo-Trotskyism and neo-cultural nationalism. And one of the major reasons, well, first of all, ideologically, I think that Trotskyism has always tried to connect with cultural nationalism and tried to be anti-King. And, they were one of the people promoting kind of this neo-Garveyism and so on. But also because they have a shared strategy, basically, and tactics, that the so-called Black left, and the more I read them, the more I think about them, the more I see that they're basically pursuing a similar agenda, that they are trying to substitute themselves as for the Black masses. Right. They're like, we are the colonized people. Like, when they say, why don't you have colonized people speaking? They mean, why don't you have us as the veterans of the so-called anti-war movement and so on speaking? And in many ways, now when I hear the term Black left, I think essentially it means Black people or activists who are close to the white left, who basically pursue similar strategies as the white left. And there's obviously a great double standard and hypocrisy, because they will criticize a predominantly white peace march when it's not part of the white left. But when it comes to the white left, they have no problem. I mean, they're basically hand in glove. And you basically, the best illustration of that was the attacks on the Rage Against the War Machine march. And yeah, I mean, so I just wanted to put that on the table.
Wait, yeah, can I add on to that? Because the Answer Coalition rally has expanded their demands and also added like a lot more organizations that are supporting it. And they specifically say to end U.S. militarism and sanctions on Syria, Cuba, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Iran, and many other nations. And there are also things like hands off Haiti and AFRICOM, and U.S. aid to racist apartheid Israel. And none of those things are like bad, but I think they're trying to basically add different special interest groups who want their demand incorporated and they want to be catered to. And actually part of it kind of reminds me of the Gerald Horne like view of like the US is just a prison house of different nations, like different special interest groups and like ethnic groups. And I feel like part of the way that this peace movement, like, or the anti-war movement that Answer Coalition sees, is basically bringing together all these disparate groups of people and then just adding a list of demands. But it's not,
I don't think it's actually that.
Okay.
Because they're not expanding or deepening.
No, they're not.
Mass involvement. But you see, by them adding all this Zimbabwe and everywhere in the world and Cuba and so on. This is, first of all, it's two things. One, it is their saying, which confirms what I believe, that their march in March is against the march in February. But what they're trying to say is, but that march in February was a fake peace march, and we are a revolutionary anti-imperialist peace coalition. When the question, prevent nuclear war, dismantle NATO, not one more penny for Ukraine. I mean, you don't have to, let me just, to solve the problem of the West moving and the United States moving towards a nuclear exchange with Russia, create the defeat of the US in Ukraine sets off another set of events where these other questions could be solved. But if you do not see the central and immediate question, if it is obscured by all of this list of demands and by this collection of micro mini, it makes the point of a corrupt politics that it is not, and I agree with Emily, it is not about the war in Ukraine anymore. It is about discrediting what happened on February 19th. And no, I don't think they will even acknowledge the 19th in any good faith, because they're interested in them becoming the, quote, voice of peace. But here is the point, and this is where this left thing gets all crazy. They want to consolidate their power as the left. They're not interested in the American people. And that's, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Nuri. Forgive me.
I agree, Doc, because, well, yeah, like what I meant with all of these, like basically separate demands, referencing all these like different places, they still don't say abolish the CIA. Like they still like are not actually talking about
Assange.
Yeah, oh, they mentioned Julian Assange, but they just say free all political prisoners.
But these are all new demands that they
they're-
added
yeah.
in the past, like.
So you know
week.
that they're doing it
24 hours. Yeah.
to basically upstage or be like, oh, we're all this and more and better. But actually, I think that the focus is not as central to like the soul of the American people. Because yeah, I was like thinking again about the Dennis Kucinich speech and how he was actually talking like to the American people. And I think that sense of like optimism that actually we can renew our country, like I believe that the American people can do it, and like we have to do it, because all this politics is also like very much about like, oh, the US has done so many things wrong, it's so bad, like all of the American people are so backwards. And I do think that these groups like largely I think are very like anti-Trump, are very anti like white worker. And if that's the basis of like this peace movement, then I feel like it's just not very principled.
Yeah, I wanted to say, so someone sent me actually a tweet that the Answer Coalition did. This is back in 2016, so I think it was like a few days before the Rage Against the War Machine March, but they basically tweeted saying, the right is trying to shepherd anti-war sentiment into the Trump wing of the Republican Party. This is a dead-end trick because Trump never was and never will be, quote, anti-war. And then they try to list like a bunch of things that Trump did that are not anti-war. So, I mean, clearly it's referenced, and then they're promoting their march. So it's clearly these veiled or not so veiled attacks on the February 19th march, because that march was not a pro-Trump march, but basically it was clear the organizers were rejecting the anti-Trump like litmus test to try to make it something broader. And also the Answer one is supposed to be on the anniversary of the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War. And all that I'm seeing, to me, it seems a bit self-referential, because all I'm seeing is like they talk about, oh, that was such a great anti-war movement, which was basically Anti-Coalition tries to say that they were the ones leading it. And so it's like, how do we celebrate what we did 20 years ago, which obviously that was not a successful anti-war movement. We need to learn. You know, a lot of people obviously participated in it and it was important, but we need to rethink how to build something more effective and broader.
No. Yeah. If I might just say, I know I'm talking a lot. You see this self-advertisement and self-congratulation. That is not what revolutionaries do. We don't do, what is this? But I don't know that the PSL existed in 2003.
Yeah, I think the answer when it was part of workers, I think they split afterwards. So the people, I think the people who formed PSL, like Brian Becker and them, they were in workers' world, they were in charge of Answer Coalition. And so they split and took it with them. That's my understanding, at least. That's what I've heard them say.
Well, however, whatever the politics were, I don't know in their movement, but to claim, just like I know they like to claim the Black Lives Matter march.
Yeah. One of the ways they've been responding to criticisms of them for going against the February 19th march, at least some of their members I've seen on Twitter, talk about in 2020, particularly specifically in Philly, the George Floyd protest. You know, there was that day where the press claimed there were like 100,000 people in front of the art museum. And they're like, see, how can you attack a group that does something like this? We're a party organizing the quote unquote masses like this.
So the question is, were you just a front for other interest? You know, like I always try to say, I'm from Philly. Don't nobody know you in Philly. So was it first of all, it was the Democratic Party along with the nonprofits and so on, who all of whom are funded by corporations and philanthropic. So, and you know, it's just such bourgeois politics. It's just like any kind of bourgeois candidate running for office. Don't forget, I did this. Don't forget, I passed this bill. Don't forget, you know, and we, because, you know, and we have, you don't have a right to do anything. And you're right. They are absolutely right. Part of it is they fear Trump. And this again, which throws them back into the camp of the neocons. Trump is, whatever he is, he's not a neocon. And those who fear Trump most is the US ruling elite. And if you share that politics, don't hide behind we're the left. Come on out and let's tell me what you're really about. And yeah, I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just to add to what you guys have been saying, I remember the first time that became acquainted with the idea of Trotskyism was when a lot of us were living in New York City, and Nellie Bailey was talking to us about some of these crazy people that she had to deal with. Very disappointed to see that now we have to deal with them. And the thing that stood out to me was that she kind of explained how they like to insert themselves into anything that was getting any energy, any traction, and like slowly, subtly divert it to one of their own interests. And it seems like, at least with these new demands, it's sowing the possibility of that. I guess we still have to see how it turns out, but I would not be surprised to see an anti-war march in practice, in essence, turn into something else that doesn't address the deep demands of the American people and the needs of our country.
It becomes an anti-Trump.
Yeah, I can read some comments as well. So back when we were talking about the Black Reconstruction event, Alice said, I agree with Emily that the event was such an immense success. The free school brought together individuals from Platypus, Midwestern Marks, family and friends, people who saw the flyer around the banner of our slogan, "We March to Achieve Our Nation." The event affirmed that ideology and specifically our rootedness in King and Du Bois, which will be the basis for optimism and hope for the future of America. For people who are discouraged from an atmosphere that attacks both the heart and the mind, this event wasn't an end, but the beginning of a long march in which I'm excited to get closer to ordinary people and their life's worlds and to know the capacity of people. As for the quote left and the quote right, it was clarifying to see that those terms are not how the rest of progressive humanity sees itself in relation to others. Russia, China, North Korea, they wouldn't really call themselves left or right, but rather a new world order, a new democracy. Shadeh also said, Serafina, so this is a part of earlier discussion on Trotsky. Serafina, that's an important observation about Trotsky-informed operations. The disunity is felt and it is jarring. Looking back, I think we handled ourselves well and kept unification at the center. Manasvi also says, I agree with Emily. I think the common basis of this optimism, of hope and love, we know what is worth debating over and what's not. Discussions like these also remind me of Baldwin's quote about love and death, because it does always remind me of what is important and the choices that we have to make. Quote, it is the responsibility of free men to trust and to celebrate what is constant. Birth, struggle, and death are constant, and so is love, though we may not always think so. And to apprehend the nature of change, to be able and willing to change. I speak of change not on the surface, but in the depths, change in the sense of renewal. And then Alice was giving some love to Tony and Emily about the booklet and saying that it's a product of the free schools discussions over the past several months. And then Shadeh agreed with Porba that rationality is morality. And then we have a lot of comments from someone on YouTube named DJ Elf, just because there's a lot of them. I'm not going to read all of them, but just to summarize, I think this person is Korean American and was originally involved in Rage Against the War Machine, but then is saying that he was ejected from the Rage Against the War Machine organizing by Nick Brana, who leads the People's Party. And I think also is not totally down maybe with the Answer Coalition rally, but it's just saying that my voice shouldn't be silenced by like a white celebrity, referring to the Rage Against the War Machine rally, and that Asian American men like me have dominated academics for 50 years. Why is it that we are still too dumb, stupid, or lazy, or ugly to have a voice in the progressive left? It's time for us to have a place. And he says that he has done lots of historic work around uniting Asians and Blacks to work to fight wrongful convictions. I think he's based in New York. And it's just saying that these people have not done the kind of work that I've done. And then is calling Nick Brana a punk and saying that this was all done to just get money. And then Emil says, it's interesting what some folks will be willing to compromise on. Instead of compromising for peace, many on the left would rather compromise on electing Biden. Instead of a good faith cooperation, it's from a bad faith trust in anything but Trump. And negative in anything but Trump, even if that means nuclear war. And I don't know. Okay, so just to go back to DJ Elf 7's comments, I don't know if you were here from the earlier part of the discussion, but actually we are organizing as the Free School a conference on Korea on March 17th and 18th. So if you're able to tune into that, that would be great. You're also welcome to come. It's going to be in Philadelphia. It seems like you're based in New York. But I think just to comment on some of DJ Elf's comments, who's saying that that he is an intergenerational victim of the Korean War, and also is saying that the Rage Against the War Machine rally should have had more Asian Americans speaking who are victims of America's wars. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think any of us really know about the internal work that went into organizing Rage Against the War Machine. I think that from our experience of the February Rage Against the War Machine rally, we didn't. We have obviously a lot of Asian people in the free school, and I don't think any of us felt unwelcome there by any means. And I think that what we're trying to say is that yes, there were obviously, or there were probably many limitations or some limitations in terms of the Rage Against the War Machine rally, but what we felt was positive, at least just speaking for myself, was that like it showed that that things can move in a new direction, and that you can bring together new groups of people who may not have been able to be in contact with each other before, and that this can hopefully start to move in a new direction. And fundamentally, the question is not really so much about the grievances of like all of these different identity groups. Like I'm also Korean American. My family also lived through the Korean War. I don't see it as a question of grievances and more a question of what are people capable of now? What are the American people capable of now? Whether we like it or not, we're all part of this country, and we have to recognize that we're all part of this country. And so yeah, I guess that's just my personal feelings about it. And yeah, if you were ejected from Rage Against the War Machine, yeah, we weren't really part of any of the internal organizing of that rally, so we can't really speak on that. But we can speak on what we experienced from the march and what we saw as positive and the potential that it represented.
Well, that was mainly what was on our agenda today. What was supposed to be the final topic was the slogan for the year.
Yes.
Which we touched upon earlier, and if you'd like, we can open it up again. But this thing of with W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King, we marched to achieve our nation. And there's a lot there. I don't know if Nuri, I had asked Nuri if she wanted to think about the slogan, but I don't know if you did, Nuri, and we could also just open it up to everyone.
Okay, so I thought about it a little bit, but I feel like unfortunately my reflection was sort of like when we talked about the slogan earlier in the context of the Black Reconstruction Symposium, I feel like in some ways it's a culmination of just free school thought, which was why it's our slogan, and like it's on the hoodie and it's on the big banner that I'm sure will stay with us for many more events to come. And so I think the way that I saw it was that it was kind of the unveiling of all of the thought and all the progress that free school has been making through the 10th anniversary and onwards. And so I don't know, if it's the slogan for the year and then that's it, or whether like it needs to be, I guess, defined as such. But I feel like my feeling was, why not? I feel like this does encapsulate what we've been talking about and thinking about, like Du Bois, King, and Baldwin put together, I think, very naturally in a new way. Yeah, so I think I kind of feel like the previous discussion like really went into how it fits into all of the ideas, like including the Korea event, where we see our responsibility and our role to basically try to understand and to share what we think the American revolutionary process is, so that we can actually make something of this country. So those are just my thoughts. But yeah, I was also wondering what other people thought of it, because yeah.
Yeah, I think the slogan, well, honestly, it really makes me just go reflect on like a meta level of free school, kind of like what Jahan was saying, where I think free school in particular, like I joined free school, I moved to Philly 3 years ago. And so that's when I started coming to free school, like here in Philly. And this past year, and especially around the 10th anniversary, I think free school reached a level like together that we haven't in the past. And that's what the slogan makes me think about, like how everything kind of has guided us to this moment where we can actually define our task so clearly like this. Yeah, define it as like we're marching to achieve our nation. And I think there's something really powerful also about the fact that that we say with Du Bois and King, that we're coming outright and saying it really is Du Bois and King and Baldwin, of course, too. But Okay, but I feel like I'm just gonna go into like a word ramble, but just that simple slogan, there's a lot in there. Like we're also saying that King was not just that King is the father of a new nation, but also that we're putting the civil rights movement in there is an assertion that the civil rights movement was a revolution. And actually the greatest revolution. It's the greatest revolution for us to inherit because it's the most recent revolution, unfinished, and that's really inspiring. And I said this in my opening remarks for the Du Bois Symposium, but the reason why I think it's really emotional to even pay tribute to someone like Du Bois or even King, like Du Bois living 95 years, like every day in dedication to this work for peace, to a work to leave knowledge for his people, the American people, to hopefully take up and be able to do something with it. And then King too, giving King, you know, like back at the 10th anniversary, the first day of our whole 10th anniversary celebration was basically in dedication to King, his vision, what he left us, his sacrifices. And we screened that documentary, King in the Wilderness, where it focuses on the last months of his life. I think the last like maybe 2 years, 1 year of his life, where King knew he was going to die. Like he knew that he would pay the ultimate price for his sacrifices. And I think even in that slogan with Du Bois and King, we march to achieve our nation, I feel like we're coming out very strongly with saying, putting Du Bois and King where they deserve to be, which is the foundation of this nation. And in particular, King and his vision, like that is what we go to. And we say it over and over and over again, like even in the 10th anniversary, that was the title of our whole 10th anniversary celebration. But our task is really to recapture the revolutionary spirit for our time. And with that revolutionary spirit, we can march to achieve our nation. And that's what the slogan makes me think of. And there's so much in the words. And also Baldwin, I think, like I was going to say this earlier, but I do go to Du Bois and King a lot more than I go to Baldwin, I think. But Baldwin is just as important. Like Baldwin has so much in him. And especially like thinking about the presentation that I'm writing for the Korea event, Baldwin, like in some ways, I think all of Baldwin's work, because he's an artist and he talks about it. Like Baldwin has this comment where he says, no matter across the world, even in Europe, these civilizations have tried to kill, like European civilization has tried to kill their artists, and until they realize that there's no way you can kill the artist. The artist will pop up in every generation for a reason. And I love that so much that Baldwin said that. And yeah, but Baldwin, like, because he is an artist, I feel like most of his work is actually about America. Is about investigating who I am, is to investigate America. And yeah, and then also the way he says to understand myself is to also even understand the white person, the white American, you know. And I think in a lot of ways, Baldwin's whole investigation of his life and his work and everything is he's trying to answer the question of what is America and what is America to be, like what is America meant to become. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I like this as a slogan for the year and just potentially as like a slogan for the free school moving forward, just because I think it captures one, the fact that the American people have an inheritance.
Yes.
Like that this is not something that just kind of we're saying now out of the blue, but like when you say achieving our nation, that obviously refers to a history, and a history which has not been fulfilled, but that there was a striving for it. And I think actually something that I've been following recently is among people in the Trump movement, there has been discussion about what they call a national divorce, which is actually Marjorie Taylor Greene mentioned this. And I've actually, because I've talked with people like family members who are supportive of Trump, and they actually kind of lean towards this idea that essentially the red states should, I don't know if they say secede from the United States, but they kind of just see it as like, they're like, why should these conservative states who voted for Trump, why should we pay the check or try to bear the burden of these blue states? And basically we should, I don't know, yeah, essentially secede. And actually like, and I don't say that just to be flippant, but I actually think that this is a serious trend amongst the Trump movement, who are fed up with national politics and who are fed up with the federal government for good reason. But, you know, the way that I kind of understand it is we literally fought a civil war over not just over, yes, over the question of slavery, but we fought a whole civil war in order to decide like, oh no, we are one country. And I just think that partially because maybe people in the Trump movement are products of that history, but are not fully cognizant of what that really means, perhaps. I think that there's a kind of faltering of confidence, perhaps, that they can actually be the ones to like really decide the future of the country in concert with so many other Americans as well. And so I think that that actually adds to the urgency of this being a slogan that can hopefully reach broader sections of people. And with also the crucial part being also, yeah, Du Bois and King, that these thinkers and these revolutionaries are the inheritance of all Americans, regardless of race. And yeah, so I don't know. I just feel like it's something that actually has, like, especially in light of what I've been seeing with like the internal dynamics with the Trump movement, and actually like prominent figures within it, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, like they're kind of toying with this idea of like, oh no, we should just break off from the United States, which I think is ultimately a defeatist and like kind of almost a cowardly way of like kind of dealing with the crisis of like the crisis of American society, especially because like I think Emily pointed this out during the 10th anniversary, but that it's not like gun violence and poverty are things that only affect blue states or blue cities. Actually, it's a nationwide crisis and is also taking place in rural communities and in conservative cities and all this stuff. And so so yeah, I don't know. It just made me reflect on that as well and how this addresses some of even like the ideological trends that are emerging, not just within the left, but also like what you could say on the right or more concretely within the Trump movement. So yeah.
Yeah, because I was also reading like the Fire Next Time, where the essay ends with the achieving our country. And I think it's the question of like the North and the South, or like the different parts of America all being one country. But I think also like like the Black worker and the white worker. And I feel like what Baldwin is also saying is that white people cannot do it alone. Like America cannot exist or become what it needs to be without figures like Du Bois and King and the Black proletariat. And that that achieving our country is necessary, like also because we're living in an age of revolution. And Baldwin says America is the only Western nation with both the power and, as I hope to suggest, the experience that may help to make these revolutions real and minimize the human damage. And so any attempt we make to oppose these outbursts of energy is tantamount to signing our death warrant. And yeah, I think just like he says, like if we could accept ourselves as we are, which is like not as a white nation, but as something more, he says we might bring new life to the Western achievements and transform them. And so I feel like in this whole thing of the Fire Next Time, like he's saying like Black Americans or the Black man is the key figure in his country, and the American future is precisely as bright or as dark as his. And so I feel like that's kind of the whole grammar of the slogan, which is with Du Bois and King, we march to achieve our nation. And I feel like it ends on like, okay, we're marching together to achieve our nation. But in the beginning part of the sentence, we're saying we have the tools, like we have the necessary tools, and this is it. Because like in the Fire Next Time, he's basically asking like, how can the history of America, and especially the history of like African Americans in America, like what does this illuminate about the possibilities of what America can have? And yeah, like in that sentence, I think, yeah, if we, and now I mean the relatively conscious whites and the relatively conscious Blacks, who must, like lovers, insist on or create the consciousness of the others, if we do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world. And so, yeah, I just think that the kernel of like achieving our country, like where all the context that it comes from is just really great.
Yeah, I think that Baldwin's contribution to the struggle for peace and democracy is ever present, because it's like, even if he isn't on the sweater as like a picture, or like you can't see his face, like the way that just basic, we're able to talk about it the way we are because we're able to use his words and say that with, like you already just said, Nuri, we have the tools, Du Bois and King. And that made me think about in the 10th anniversary when we also showed Baldwin's, what do we show? Like the documentary, or like half documentary?
Oh, yeah.
We did a lot during the 10th anniversary doc. But I only bring that up because the atmosphere of that day was like really interesting to me. Like I still have this flash image in my mind where the kids were like running around and like we was watching, you know, different people in Baldwin's life like talk about Baldwin and like.
I think the documentary was the price of the ticket.
Thank you, because I wouldn't have remembered it. And like the thing about, or like the specific feeling that I'm also thinking about and like trying to take away with is the fact that like the possibilities are endless, or like that there is a sky. That's another thing, the 10th anniversary. There is a sky.
There's a sky.
And you know, there's different ways that you can see Baldwin's life, and also, you know, like him as a man, him as an artist, him as like a fiery, like he's not gonna, you know, he's gonna talk as much as he has to in an honest way. And this is me saying it without cursing, 'cause I'm not gonna do that. But like, you know, and all the relationships that he had in his life, like with Lorraine Hansberry and his, like, all his relationships.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad,
and
Martin Luther
him talking
King.
about that interaction with the Nation of Islam,
Yeah.
but also his students and you know, him with his family, young people, children, always like referencing his stories to one of his either his cousins or like nephews, and him talking about, or in his stories sharing information about him growing up as a young person, as you know, like who Baldwin is not something to be contained. He cannot be contained. And I think I'm saying this because of what Emily said earlier about how an artist comes in every generation, regardless of what the conditions are or whatever, because it's that thing, that essence that we're all carrying forward with, like, well, there is still hope, like there is still a dream, there is still something that is positive that can come out of this world, and it doesn't have to be what is, you know, supposed to be, like, oh, you're just supposed to get a job, or you're supposed to just do X whatever. Like, you do actually, like, there is something more that you as a human being on this planet can give. And I think, like, I had a conversation with somebody at work yesterday, like, she was like this 20, she's like either 20 or 21 or something, but she studies film at Temple. And I was like, I know this other person who does film or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But she is from like somewhere outside, like kind of like, you know, Lancaster type of town or whatever in Pennsylvania. And her parents had her when they were young. So it's like that. And I asked her, like, well, what kind of like movies, or like, you know, what kind of stories do you like to write about? And she was like, well, and I was like, do you want to write about like rom-coms or like drama or mysteries? Are you a murder mystery kind of girl or whatever? And she was like, no, I just like writing about everyday life. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, that's really, really nice. And here's me at the job, like, with, everything's going on. And like, it's almost like we're not really having this conversation or whatever, or we're not, it's like, anyway, and then I asked her again, like, well, what was the first story that you ever wrote? I said writ to test her. And she was like, you mean wrote? And I was like, yeah. But she couldn't remember the first story that she wrote, but she did remember a teacher that told her that she was a good writer. She was like, okay, I'm gonna go with it or whatever. But another thing interesting that she had said to me was, or in our interaction, was something that came out of me, which I felt like I needed to tell her. Because I was like, the one thing that, like, well, one, you don't have to be scared of anything. You don't have to, worry about what everybody else has to say. Like, if you want to say something, like, just say it or whatever. You don't have to stress over that. But then two, what you have to offer is important. And what you want to make is important. Even if it's small, even if it's with only your family who recognize its importance. And I think that conversation happened because I don't know why, I forget who said what, but she's kind of like this girl who like, oh, I don't want to be like bigger than myself. Like, I don't want to, don't hold yourself back. Like, be able to speak, say what. And I think this is also part of what we're talking about with We March to Achieve Our Nation. We were capturing the question of reunification, like, and also the underlying conversation that we had earlier. This is the democratic demands that people are having and are working towards day to day, Madre Jesse, and so on and so forth. Like, the fact that people, like, this is the crux, this is the kernel, this is what people want, to be united, to have a vision. And I just think that, and the fact of the matter is that we're not speaking of free school or of just me, Serafina. Like, I'm a part of something that's bigger than myself. We're all a part of something that's bigger than just, the live stream, as we are seeing other people comment and interacting with them. Like, this is about how we can actually achieve our nation that we talk about, like achieving it. And the wording has less to do with how, like, it's like saying the right thing, and more about how we are actually saying what is true already, and we're bringing that to the forefront.
Okay, I guess we're close to 2, but I can read some final comments in the live stream. So Alice on Facebook says, the slogan addresses this ideological crisis today when people are made to feel that they can't do anything, that there is no American nation. Our slogan affirms that we can march, we can build, we can transform this nation. Our nation, which as Doc said earlier, we are responsible for. Virginia Kotz says, I remember the disapproval for Dr. King speaking out against the Vietnam War. The media felt that he was weakening, quote, his cause. And earlier she said, I forgot to read this, but she said that, if you think that you aren't American, then just try to pay your bills in anything other than US dollars. And then we have some more comments from people on YouTube. And I just want to ask, we're kind of new to live streaming on YouTube. We used to only stream on Facebook where like we could see people's names. And if it's okay with people on YouTube, we want to ask if people can like just say what their names are, just because it helps us to like know who's actually speaking. And I know that people often have like usernames on YouTube, which is fine. But if people could like say their names, that would be great, just because we're more used to that after being on Facebook. So the person DJ Elf who's been commenting says, knowledge is power, but I say that that's wrong. Knowledge without power to leverage that knowledge is meaningless. And he says, we should learn by doing. When you read a book about cycling as an experienced cyclist, it's different from reading that book as someone who's never rode a bike before. Therefore, he's telling us to get activist accomplishments done and then revisit these books you talk about as you transform solely your words. And also adds, the workers have a lot in common, but our message is not being carried by the media. We should all communicate with each other directly as possible and not allow thought leaders to have too much control over the narrative. The truth is in the streets and not in the thought palaces. And just to that point, I think, yeah, we're not people, I think, to boast or brag about what our activist accomplishments are. Like the Free School for many years has been doing work in Philadelphia. And I think that shows in what we do. And we're not just like, yes, we have this live stream, which we do every Saturday, but yeah, I think we're just not like, I think that our work shows in what we're doing. And yeah, like you're welcome to check us out and see actually what we've been doing in Philly for about 10 years now, part of which we covered in our 10th anniversary, which happened last fall. And then someone named E Pluribus Regnum says, it's about humanization. A worker can't achieve full class consciousness without being able to fully humanize all workers of all ethnicities. The white worker, until able to fully humanize the Black worker, was incapable of becoming class conscious and therefore couldn't fully become the proletariat. But I do think that a majority of white workers today, certainly ones of the millennial generation and forward, fully acknowledge the humanity, equality, and dignity of their fellow Black workers. And I think that as a class, the American worker is close to class consciousness. And then, okay, let me just keep going. Virginia says on Facebook, there used to be a saying, don't hide your light under a bushel basket. Seraphina's story makes me think of that.
Don't hide your light under a bushel.
Yeah, and then DJ Elf, who says his name is Ed Lee, but would prefer to go by DJ Elf 7, I think has some, it's basically saying that Asian American men in particular are not really included in conversations and political conversations, which I think that may be from your experience. And then, yeah, E Pluribus Regnum again says his name is Wade. Sorry, I think you may have mentioned that before in a previous comment, but in a previous live stream, but I just forgot. But yeah, I think part of the thing that that Ed is bringing up is that, like, this is also a trend that comes up with the anti-war rallies and the Answer Coalition thing, where it becomes much more about like trying to prove to people that you're the real activist and you're the one who's been doing this work for all this time. And I mean, Doc has covered it like in our discussion or even today, but like for us, the way we approach things is not about trying to just give our bona fides and our credentials, like, oh, we're the ones who've been doing this work. And it's more about like, if you think of yourself as an activist or revolutionary, we think that it makes sense to approach that first from a place of humility, but also fundamentally, it's like, if we're all interested in trying to serve humanity and serve the people, then like, let's start from that place and sort of trying to prove how radical we are, or that we're the real activists who've been doing this work. And so, yeah, I just feel like that's been our approach to things, and part of why we have been critiquing even the Answer Coalition rally, just because they're coming from a place of trying to be like, oh no, we're the real activists and you shouldn't trust these people because they haven't been doing the same thing that we've been doing for 20 years. And that's just, I think, an ego-centered approach towards being an activist or a revolutionary, if that is what you call yourself.
Okay, it's 2:00. Oh.
Okay, I thought it was a very good discussion today, and
oh yeah,
and I'm really glad we ended on the conversation about the slogan. But thank you for everyone who participated in the comments on Facebook and YouTube, and we are really looking forward to both seeing you next week for our next free school, but also at our upcoming Korea event, which is in less than 2 weeks. So don't forget to look at the program at koreapeace.org. And then also, if you'd like to help make that wonderful exhibit, which we showed a sneak peek of, help make it possible, you can donate via our GoFundMe, which is also at koreapeace.org. And that's it. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.